The Straw Man Fallacy. Picture two friends at a cafe, debating whether schools should focus more on critical thinking. One says, "We should teach kids how to analyze arguments, not just memorize facts." The other leans back, smirks, and replies, "Oh, so you think we should throw out all traditional education and let kids make up their own facts?" The first sighs, frustrated. The discussion has already been derailed. That's the Straw Man Fallacy. A distortion of an argument to make it easier to attack. Instead of addressing what was actually said, the opponent replaces it with a weaker version, something absurd or extreme. The original point, teaching critical thinking, never claimed that facts should be ignored. But by exaggerating the position, the second speaker dodges the real discussion, creating a false debate where one was never needed. This trick works because it shifts the conversation. Instead of defending their own view, the first speaker is now stuck clarifying what they never said. And once a debate becomes about correcting misrepresentations, it stops being about truth. The moment someone has to explain, "That's not what I meant," the discussion is already lost. The more time spent untangling false claims, the further the real issue drifts out of sight. It's easy to spot in political speeches, online debates, and even casual arguments. A complex issue gets boiled down into a ridiculous version, easy to knock over, like a flimsy straw man in the wind. In the media, news outlets may misrepresent an opponent's stance, making them sound extreme or unreasonable. Advertisers do it too, mischaracterizing competitors' products to make theirs seem superior. It happens in personal conversations, where someone twists another's words to make them sound foolish or extreme. The more exaggerated the distortion, the easier it is to attack. But when arguments get twisted like this, nobody wins. The real discussion gets buried under misrepresentation, and in the end, truth is the biggest casualty. Instead of engaging in meaningful debate, people argue against illusions. Ideas are not tested honestly, positions are not fairly considered, and real progress stalls. Recognizing a straw man fallacy is the first step in avoiding it. The next step, refusing to fight the fake battles it creates, and instead focusing on the truth behind the misrepresentations. Ad hominem. A dimly lit courtroom. The defense attorney leans in, voice sharp. "Ladies and gentlemen, can we really trust a man who was caught cheating on his taxes?" The jury stirs. The accused shifts uncomfortably. But here's the problem. His taxes have nothing to do with the case. The lawyer isn't attacking the argument. He's attacking the man. That's ad hominem, Latin for to the person. Instead of addressing the substance of a claim, it shifts the focus to personal flaws, real or imagined. A scientist's theory is dismissed because of their past mistakes. A journalist's report is ignored because of their political views. A student's opinion is rejected because of their background. None of these address the actual argument. The person's credibility may be questioned, but their argument remains untouched. It works because people are quick to judge character. We assume that if someone is flawed, their ideas must be too. But truth isn't tied to the person who speaks it. A liar can tell the time correctly. A thief can warn of danger. A flawed person can still have a point. And yet, when a debate becomes about personal attacks, reason takes a back seat to emotion. This fallacy is common in politics, where candidates dodge policy debates by attacking each other's personal lives. It thrives in online arguments, where insults replace reasoned discussion. Even in professional settings, it creeps into boardroom disputes, where someone's past failures are used to dismiss their present ideas. But when the person, not the point, is under attack, something gets lost. The argument is left unanswered, and the truth, it never gets its day in court. Instead of evaluating the claim itself, the focus shifts to whether we like or trust the speaker. The result, important discussions derail, and real issues remain unresolved. Recognizing ad hominem is key to avoiding it. The next time a debate turns personal, ask, "Am I addressing the argument or just attacking the person?" Truth stands on its own, regardless of who speaks it. The challenge isn't who is saying something, but whether what they're saying is actually true. False dilemma. The rain pounds against the cafe window as two friends argue over dinner. One leans forward and says with a firm voice, "Either you support every policy of this government, or you're against the country." The other frowns. "What if I agree with some things but not others?" But the first shakes his head. It's one or the other. No middle ground. That's false dilemma, also called black and white thinking. It traps complex issues into just two choices, right or wrong, good or evil, with us or against us. But reality isn't so simple. Most issues exist in shades of gray, filled with possibilities beyond just two extremes. Life is full of nuance, but this fallacy ignores it, forcing an oversimplified view of the world. This fallacy is powerful because it triggers emotional responses. People fear being labeled as disloyal, weak, or indecisive. In politics, it's used to push agendas. You're either for freedom or against it. In business, it's a sales tactic. Either you buy our premium plan, or you settle for less. In relationships, it leads to ultimatums. If you really cared about me, you'd agree with me. The pattern is always the same, reducing complex discussions into two extreme options. But real decisions are rarely that simple. Maybe there's a third way. Maybe there are 100. Ignoring alternatives means ignoring creative solutions, thoughtful compromise, and new possibilities. The danger of false dilemma is that it forces people to pick a side instead of thinking critically. It can lead to division, misunderstandings, and rash decisions. But life isn't a coin flip. The truth often lies in the space between. The next time someone presents only two choices, stop and ask, what are they leaving out? Appeal to emotion. The politician's voice trembles as she holds up a photo of a crying child. "If you don't support this law," she says, "then you don't care about children's suffering." The audience shifts uncomfortably. The debate was about economic policy. But now, reason has left the room. That's appeal to emotion, replacing logic with fear, anger, pity, or guilt. It bypasses critical thinking, making people feel instead of think. A charity ad shows starving animals to push donations. A salesman says, "Don't you want your family to be safe?" instead of explaining why his product works. A speaker raises their voice, fills their words with passion, but never offers proof. The goal is to persuade not by reason, but by making the audience feel something so deeply that they stop questioning the argument itself. It works because emotions are deeply tied to decision-making. Fear can override skepticism. Guilt can push people into agreements they wouldn't normally make. Anger can turn debates into battles. Politicians use it to stir crowds. Marketers use it to drive sales. Even in personal arguments, people resort to it. "If you really loved me, you'd agree with me." The appeal isn't to logic but to the heart. And the stronger the emotional pull, the harder it becomes to resist. This fallacy is especially effective when paired with vivid imagery. A single emotional anecdote can overshadow mountains of data. A dramatic personal story can drown out statistical analysis. This is why political campaigns focus on individual tragedies rather than broad economic trends. Why social media posts go viral, not because they are factual, but because they provoke outrage, sympathy, or fear. People don't share graphs, they share emotions. But while emotion is a powerful tool, it isn't a substitute for truth. A moving speech without evidence is just manipulation. A bad argument dressed in sentiment is still a bad argument. The strongest ideas stand on their own, without needing tears to hold them up. The next time an argument tugs at your heartstrings, take a step back and ask, is there real reasoning behind this, or just an attempt to make me feel? Because while emotions may guide decisions, they should never replace logic entirely. Logic should lead, and emotion should follow, not the other way around. Slippery slope. A father watches his son reach for a second cookie. First, it's 2, he warns. Then it's 5. Next thing you know, you're eating nothing but sugar. Failing school and living in my basement at 40. The boy freezes. He just wanted a cookie. But in his father's mind, a harmless indulgence has already turned into lifelong failure. That slippery slope, the belief that one small step will spiral into disaster. A teenager dyes their hair, and suddenly they're on the path to rebellion. A new law passes, and some claim it will lead to tyranny. A minor policy change, they say, is just the first domino before everything collapses. These arguments assume that once an action is taken, an inevitable chain of increasingly severe consequences will follow, even when no real evidence supports such a drastic progression. It works because fear is persuasive. It makes people cautious, even when the leap from A to Z has no real logic. People find comfort in certainty, and slippery slope arguments offer a false sense of predictability. They suggest that allowing any change is the beginning of an uncontrollable decline, even when each step can be considered and regulated independently. This fallacy is often used in politics, morality debates, and social issues. A politician might argue, "If we legalize this, what's next?" implying that a reasonable change will inevitably lead to chaos. A parent might claim, "If I let you stay out late once, soon you'll be skipping school." While caution is valuable, assuming disaster without evidence limits progress and discourages rational decision-making. But not every first step leads to ruin. Sometimes, a cookie is just a cookie. Thoughtful choices and boundaries exist. Life is not always a runaway train. Circular reasoning. The old bookstore smells of ink and dust. A customer asks the owner, "Why is this book true?" The owner taps the cover. "Because the author says so." "But how do we know the author is right?" The owner smiles. "Because it's written in the book." The customer frowns, sensing something is off. That's circular reasoning, when an argument loops back on itself, using its own claim as proof. It might sound convincing at first, but look closer and you'll find it never actually proves anything. This politician is trustworthy because he says he is. This diet works because the ad says it does. The law is just because it's the law. Each one assumes what it's supposed to prove, offering no independent evidence. It works because people like certainty. A neat, closed circle feels complete. But real proof lies outside the argument, not within it. Without evidence, a claim spinning in circles goes nowhere, just like a book proving itself by its own words. The illusion of logic can be persuasive, yet beneath it there's nothing but repetition. If all roads in reasoning lead back to the starting point, then it's not a road at all, just a loop going nowhere. This fallacy appears in religion, politics, advertising, and everyday conversations. A preacher declares, "The holy text is true because it is the word of God." But how do we know? Because the holy text says so. A government official insists, "We must follow the law because it is the law." Advertisers claim, "Our product is the best because it's the most popular, and it's the most popular because it's the best." The argument never leaves its own logic bubble. Circular reasoning can be subtle, disguised within more complex arguments. A lawyer might argue, "My client is innocent because he is an honest man, and we know he is honest because he says he is innocent." A scientist might claim, "This theory must be correct because no evidence contradicts it," failing to acknowledge that a lack of contradiction isn't proof. The danger of circular reasoning is that it can be difficult to spot. When an argument feels complete, it's easy to accept it without question. But true reasoning requires external validation, independent evidence, logical connections, real-world proof. Otherwise, it's like running in circles, mistaking motion for progress. The best way to avoid this fallacy is to step back and ask, what is the actual proof? If the only answer leads back to the original claim, then the argument is caught in its own loop, proving nothing at all. Bandwagon Fallacy. The festival crowd roars as the singer steps onto the stage. A newcomer, unsure at first, looks around and joins in. This must be amazing if everyone loves it. They think the excitement is contagious. But do they actually like the music? Or are they just going along with the crowd? What if the performance is mediocre? What if the cheers are more about the experience of belonging than the quality of the act itself? That's bandwagon fallacy, the belief that something must be true or good because many people believe it. It whispers, everyone's doing it, so you should too. A politician gains support not for their ideas, but because they're leading in the polls. A product flies off shelves, not for its quality, but because it's trending. A superstition spreads, not from proof, but from sheer popularity. People assume that widespread acceptance equals correctness. But history is filled with examples where the crowd got it wrong. It works because humans crave belonging. We are social creatures, hardwired to conform. The fear of standing alone or being left out makes us trust the majority. If thousands of people believe in a miracle cure, it must work, right? If a new diet is all over social media, it has to be effective. If a news article has been shared millions of times, it must be accurate. But none of these things make the claims true. Popularity isn't proof. The best ideas don't always win the popularity contest, and the loudest voices aren't always the most correct. The bandwagon fallacy appears everywhere, from marketing to politics to everyday decision-making. Advertisers exploit it by using phrases like America's #1 brand or best-selling product. Political campaigns rely on it to build momentum. Even scientific misconceptions can spread when enough people repeat them. In conversations, people may dismiss valid arguments simply because they aren't widely accepted. Everyone knows this is true isn't an argument, it's just an appeal to popularity. But the majority isn't always right. Once the world believed the earth was flat. Once smoking was considered healthy. Once people thought heavier-than-air flight was impossible. The crowd can be wrong. Truth isn't determined by a vote. Just because an idea is widely accepted doesn't mean it's accurate, and just because the crowd is moving in one direction doesn't mean it's the right path. The real challenge is to think critically, even when it means standing apart. Post hoc ergo propter hoc. The old man tosses a pinch of salt over his shoulder just as a black cat crosses his path. That afternoon he trips on the stairs. It was the cat, he mutters. But was it really, or was it just coincidence? He never questions whether he might have been distracted wearing slippery shoes or simply unlucky. The connection seems obvious. One event followed another, so the first must have caused the second. That's post hoc ergo propter hoc, Latin for after this. Therefore, because of this, also known as false cause, the mistaken belief that because one event happens before another, the first must have caused the second. Superstitions thrive on this logic. A team wins after wearing lucky socks, so the socks must be the reason. A new law passes and crime drops, so the law gets the credit, even if the trend had already started. A celebrity posts about a diet, and their fans assume it must work because they look great. The belief feels intuitive, but it lacks proof. It works because patterns comfort us. We want causes for every effect, and randomness unsettles us. Our brains are wired to find order in chaos, even when no real connection exists. If two things happen in sequence, we instinctively search for a link. A person drinks green tea before an exam and scores well. Suddenly, green tea is a study hack. A new CEO takes over and profits rise. But was it leadership, or was the market already improving? A town installs more streetlights and crime decreases, but maybe crime was already declining for other reasons. The assumption that after means because of is compelling but flawed. This fallacy doesn't just appear in everyday logic, it influences major decisions. In politics, leaders take credit for economic upturns that began long before their policies took effect. In medicine, people attribute recovery to home remedies instead of the actual treatment. In business, a new marketing campaign is celebrated for boosting sales, even if consumer demand was already rising. The illusion of cause and effect shapes opinions, policies, and even beliefs about the world. The problem with false cause is that it oversimplifies reality. It blinds us to deeper, more complex explanations. Correlation is not causation. Just because the rooster crows before sunrise doesn't mean it makes the sun rise. If we assume one event directly leads to another without evidence, we risk making poor decisions based on illusions rather than truth. The challenge is to pause, question, and seek real proof before drawing conclusions. True understanding comes not from seeing patterns, but from proving them. The No True Scotsman Fallacy. A man in a cafe sips his tea and declares, "No Scotsman puts sugar in his tea." Another customer chimes in, "But my Uncle Angus is Scottish, and he loves sugar in his tea." The first man scoffs. Well, no true Scotsman would do that. The definition of a Scotsman has suddenly changed, not based on facts, but to keep the original claim intact. That's the No True Scotsman Fallacy, moving the goalpost to exclude counterexamples. It happens when someone redefines a group to protect a claim. No real artist uses digital tools. No true patriot criticizes their government. No true gamer plays on easy mode. Every time a counterexample appears, the definition is adjusted, keeping the original statement safe from scrutiny. This fallacy thrives because identity is powerful. People want their group to stay pure, their beliefs untouchable. The thought that a member of the group could contradict the stereotype is uncomfortable, so instead of adjusting the claim, people redefine the group itself. But reality doesn't bend to fit our definitions. A true Scotsman is still Scottish, no matter how he takes his tea. A true artist is still an artist, whether they use a brush or a tablet. A real patriot can love their country while questioning its leadership. This fallacy is common in debates about morality, culture, and even politics. A movement's supporters might claim no real environmentalist flies on airplanes. A fitness enthusiast might say no true athlete skips leg day. A political party might insist no real member of our party would ever support that policy. These statements aren't about facts, they're about protecting an idea from contradiction. The danger of the No True Scotsman Fallacy is that it shuts down discussion. Instead of engaging with counterexamples, it dismisses them outright. This makes meaningful debate impossible because the definition keeps shifting. If the only true members of a group are those who perfectly fit an idealized mold, then the definition loses meaning altogether. Truth isn't found in exclusion. It's found in facing facts, even when they challenge what we believe. The next time someone insists that no true member of a group would act a certain way, ask yourself, are they defending a claim or just redefining reality to avoid admitting they were wrong? Red herring. The detective presses the suspect. "Where were you last night at 10? The suspect leans back, smiling. "Why aren't we talking about the real issue? Crime is out of control in this city. Shouldn't we focus on that instead?" The detective sighs. Another red herring, a deliberate distraction meant to pull attention away from the real question. A red herring is a diversion tactic, a shift in conversation that steers away from the actual issue. Instead of answering a direct question, someone introduces an unrelated topic, often one that stirs emotion or controversy. A politician, asked about a scandal, responds by attacking the media. A student, caught cheating, argues that the test was unfair. A company facing criticism for poor working conditions shifts the conversation to their recent charitable donations. A debater, unable to defend their claim, suddenly pivots to a completely different subject. This fallacy works because distractions are effective. If an argument becomes about something else, the original point fades into the background. The more engaging or emotional the diversion, the easier it is to forget what was actually at stake. An audience eager for entertainment or controversy may follow the distraction without noticing the evasion. Media outlets, politicians, and public figures use this technique regularly, turning attention away from difficult questions by throwing a more dramatic topic into the spotlight. Red herrings are particularly common in debates and public discourse. When a scientific study challenges a company's product, the company might shift the conversation to how many jobs they provide. When a celebrity is criticized for unethical behavior, they might release a heartfelt story about their charity work. Instead of addressing the problem, they redirect attention to something emotionally charged or seemingly urgent, hoping the audience forgets the original issue. But a truth buried under distractions is still a truth, waiting to be uncovered. Recognizing red herrings requires focus, staying on track, refusing to follow the diversion, and insisting that the real question be answered. The next time a discussion suddenly shifts to an unrelated topic, ask yourself, is this actually relevant, or just a distraction? The truth doesn't disappear just because someone tries to change the subject. To Quoque. The debate heats up. A senator is accused of dishonesty. Instead of defending himself, he points at his opponent. You lied in the past too. The crowd murmurs, the accusation forgotten. The focus has shifted. That's tu quoque. Latin for you too. Instead of answering the criticism, the accused dodges responsibility by turning the blame back on the accuser, creating the illusion that their own wrongdoing doesn't matter. Tu quoque is the fallacy of deflection. Instead of addressing criticism, it redirects the conversation, making it about the other person's past faults. A parent scolds their child for smoking, only to hear, "But you smoked when you were young." A company is criticized for unethical practices and responds, "Our competitors do the same thing." A politician avoids a tough question by attacking their opponent's past mistakes. The original argument remains unanswered, buried under a counterattack. By shifting the focus to the accuser's past, the issue at hand is left unresolved. It works because hypocrisy is easy to call out. If the critic has ever made a similar mistake, the accused can shift attention away from their own actions. But past mistakes don't make present criticism invalid. A doctor who once ate unhealthy food can still warn about bad diets. A teacher who struggled in school can still guide students to success. A parent who made bad choices can still give good advice. Mistakes of the past don't erase the validity of a present argument. The fallacy thrives in politics, debates, and personal arguments. A corrupt leader confronted with allegations turns the conversation toward the misdeeds of their opponent. A celebrity caught in a scandal deflects by exposing someone else's controversies. A business facing lawsuits argues that other companies engage in similar practices. The real issue is never addressed. It just gets drowned out in a back and forth of accusations. The fallacy is effective because it feels like justice. Exposing hypocrisy can be satisfying. But hypocrisy and truth aren't the same thing. Even if someone has failed to follow their own advice, that doesn't make the advice wrong. A flawed messenger doesn't make the message false. Truth stands on its own, no matter who speaks it. To spot tu quoque, ask, is this response actually addressing the argument or just attacking the person making it? If it's the latter, the debate is no longer about truth, it's about avoiding accountability. And when an argument is dodged with tu quoque, the real issue remains unresolved, lost in a game of blame. Hasty Generalization. A man visits a new city and has a rude encounter with a local. People here are so unfriendly, he mutters. He's met one person, but in his mind, the whole city is already judged. A single experience becomes the foundation of his belief, and from that moment on, every interaction is filtered through that assumption. If another person is cold toward him, it reinforces his idea. If someone is kind, he might dismiss it as an exception. His first impression shapes everything that follows. That's hasty generalization, drawing a broad conclusion from limited evidence. It's the foundation of stereotypes, snap judgments, and misleading arguments. A student fails one math test and decides they're bad at math forever. A driver sees one reckless teenager and assumes all young people are terrible drivers. A tourist has a bad meal in a new country and claims the entire cuisine is awful. A single bad experience becomes proof of a larger truth, ignoring the thousands of unseen counterexamples that could tell a different story. It works because our brains crave patterns. We make quick decisions to save time, simplifying the world into categories. This instinct helps us survive, but it also leads to errors. A single data point isn't a trend. A few bad apples don't define the whole orchard. One lost game doesn't make someone a bad athlete. Truth requires more than just one example. It demands a broader view, more data, and the patience to recognize that reality is rarely as simple as it first appears. The danger of hasty generalization is that it leads to false beliefs, unfair stereotypes, and poor decisions. Just because something happened once doesn't mean it always will. Judging an entire group, idea, or situation based on limited information closes the door to understanding. A single event, no matter how striking, is just a fraction of the full picture. The world is bigger than a single story, and if we want to truly understand it, we must resist the urge to generalize too quickly. First impressions matter, but second chances matter even more. Appeal to authority. A new health trend sweeps the internet. A famous actor swears by it, and suddenly millions follow suit. It must work, they say. He's rich and successful. But does expertise in acting translate to expertise in health? Would we trust a scientist to give fashion advice or a musician to perform surgery? Fame and knowledge are not the same. That's appeal to authority. The mistake of assuming something is true simply because an authority figure endorses it. A celebrity promotes a miracle cure with no scientific backing. A politician claims a law is good because an economist supports it, ignoring the counter-arguments. A professor declares an idea correct outside their field, and people accept it without question. Even well-meaning experts can be wrong when speaking outside their area of expertise. It works because we trust experts. People respect credentials and assume knowledge in one field applies broadly. But a physicist isn't automatically right about nutrition. A billionaire's success doesn't make them an expert on morality. Even in science, consensus matters more than a single expert's claim. Scientific breakthroughs rely on peer review, testing, and independent verification, not just one authority's word. This fallacy is everywhere, from advertising to politics. Companies use phrases like recommended by doctors without specifying who those doctors are. Political figures cite single economists, ignoring broader consensus. Even in conversations, people say, "My uncle is a lawyer, and he says this contract is unfair," without considering their specialization. The appeal to authority fallacy thrives on media influence. A journalist interviewing an expert outside their field can mislead audiences. A tech mogul might share opinions on education policy despite lacking expertise. Their authority in one area lends them credibility where it shouldn't. The danger is that it discourages critical thinking. People who accept claims without evaluating the evidence risk following bad advice. A famous athlete endorsing a supplement doesn't mean it works. A historian commenting on medical treatments doesn't make them a doctor. Even respected figures can be misinformed, biased, or speaking outside their depth. Truth isn't based on who says it, it's based on evidence. Authority can guide us, but it should never replace thinking for ourselves. The strongest ideas withstand scrutiny, no matter who presents them. The next time someone relies on an authority figure's endorsement, ask, "Where's the proof?" Real knowledge isn't built on names, it's built on facts. Gambler's Fallacy. A man at the roulette table wipes his brow. The last 5 spins landed on red. He grips his chips, heart pounding. "It has to be black this time," he whispers. The other players nod in agreement, their eyes locked on the wheel. The dealer spins and the ball bounces erratically, but the outcome remains as unpredictable as ever. Frustration spreads across the table, yet the belief lingers, surely a change is coming. That's Gambler's Fallacy, the mistaken belief that past events affect future probabilities in independent events. A coin lands heads 5 times in a row, and we assume tails is due. A lottery ticket buyer picks numbers that haven't won in years, convinced they're more likely to hit. A baseball player gets a streak of hits, and fans believe he's hot, as if his chances have changed. The mind resists the idea that each event is separate, that the universe doesn't keep score. Instead, it clings to the comforting illusion of balance. It works because our brains look for patterns, even where none exist. We see streaks and believe they hold meaning. Randomness feels unnatural, so we impose order, making connections where there are none. This instinct can be useful in survival. Spotting patterns helps us anticipate danger, but when applied to probability, it leads us astray. A fair coin always has a 50-50 chance, no matter how many times it lands heads. A roulette wheel has no memory. A lottery draw doesn't favor overdue numbers. Each outcome stands alone. The fallacy isn't just about gambling. It affects everyday thinking. Investors hold on to losing stocks, convinced a turnaround is due. A student assumes their bad luck on tests must balance out eventually. A soccer fan insists their team is cursed after a string of defeats. Even in relationships, people believe that after too many disappointments, something good must finally happen. But reality doesn't work that way. The past can shape expectations, but it doesn't control the future. The fallacy can lead to poor choices, from reckless bets to misplaced confidence. It convinces people to chase losses, believing their luck must turn around. Some risk everything, thinking the odds must even out, only to lose more. Others refuse to take chances, fearing that a streak of good luck must eventually end. But patterns don't dictate the future. Only probabilities do. Luck has no memory, and randomness doesn't keep a scoreboard. The world isn't fair, and fate doesn't owe anyone a win. The best way to avoid the gambler's fallacy is to accept uncertainty and make decisions based on logic, not illusions. False equivalence. A man watches a debate on climate change. One scientist presents years of rigorous research, citing peer-reviewed studies, climate models, and data from experts in the field. The other panelist, a blogger with no scientific background, shrugs and says, "Well, we both have opinions." The moderator nods as if both views carry equal weight. But do they? Are all opinions equally valid? That's false equivalence. The fallacy of treating two things as equal when they are not. It happens when critical differences are ignored or oversimplified. A journalist gives a platform to both a medical expert and a conspiracy theorist, presenting them as equals. A news outlet reports on a minor ethical lapse in one company and a major corporate fraud scandal in another, as if they are comparable. A politician claims both parties are corrupt, equating minor bureaucratic inefficiencies with blatant criminal misconduct. It works because fairness feels right. We want balance, so we assume that if two sides exist, they must be equally valid. But fairness isn't the same as accuracy. Not all ideas deserve equal consideration. A trained engineer and a self-taught amateur might both have opinions on bridge safety, but only one has studied structural integrity. A historian and a casual blogger might both have theories about ancient civilizations, but only one has spent years analyzing credible sources. False equivalence is dangerous because it distorts reality. It blurs the lines between expertise and opinion, fact and fiction, major and minor. It convinces people that issues are more balanced than they really are. In journalism, it creates false balance, where misleading ideas are given equal airtime as well-established facts. In politics, it leads to moral relativism, where serious wrongdoing is dismissed with both sides do it. And in everyday conversations, it clouds judgment, making it harder to separate real knowledge from noise. Not every viewpoint deserves equal footing. Some arguments have more evidence, more expertise, more weight. False balance doesn't inform, it misleads. And when all things are made to seem equal, truth is often the first casualty. Composition fallacy. A chef carefully selects the finest ingredients, fresh herbs, ripe tomatoes, aged cheese. With ingredients this good, he says, the dish will be perfect. But when he pulls it from the oven, it's a disaster. The flavors clash, the texture is off, and nothing works together. Good parts don't always make a great whole. A meal isn't just a list of ingredients, it's how they come together that determines success. That's composition fallacy, assuming that what's true for the parts must be true for the whole. A football team signs the best players in every position and assumes they'll dominate, forgetting that teamwork and strategy matter. A company hires top executives from different industries, expecting automatic success, but they fail to collaborate. A stock portfolio is filled with high-performing stocks, but together they create too much risk. Even a luxury home built with premium materials can still have a flawed design. The assumption that assembling the best parts leads to the best outcome ignores the reality of structure, relationships, and balance. It works because we associate quality with consistency. If every part is excellent, the whole must be too. But reality is more complicated. A great team needs chemistry, not just talent. A delicious meal needs balance, not just expensive ingredients. A well-functioning system depends on how its pieces work together, not just the quality of each piece. In everything from science to business, structure and interaction matter just as much as the individual components. A spacecraft might have the best engine, navigation system, and materials, but if they aren't properly integrated, the mission fails. The composition fallacy affects many areas of life. A film with an all-star cast won't always be a masterpiece if the story is weak. A classroom filled with gifted students won't succeed if the curriculum is flawed. A neighborhood with expensive homes isn't automatically a great place to live if there's no sense of community. Success depends not only on quality components, but on how they function together. The fallacy can lead to bad decisions, whether in business, sports, or daily life. A collection of the best does not always result in the best outcome. Sometimes, elements clash, compete, or fail to complement each other. A puzzle isn't complete just because the pieces are high quality. They have to fit together. A symphony isn't just a collection of talented musicians. It's about how they play together. Success isn't about assembling the best parts. It's about ensuring they work in harmony. To see the bigger picture, we must look beyond the sum of the parts and understand the connections that hold everything together. Division fallacy. A company is known for its success, strong profits, happy customers, and a great reputation. A new hire assumes, since the company is great, every employee must be exceptional. But does that follow? Within any organization, there are high performers, average workers, and those who struggle. The company's reputation doesn't automatically apply to every individual. That's division fallacy, assuming what's true for the whole must be true for each part. If a car is expensive, every component must be premium. If a team wins a championship, every player must be elite. If a political movement is admirable, every supporter must share the same values. But reality doesn't work that way. Just as a well-reviewed restaurant can still serve a bad meal, an award-winning film can have forgettable scenes. This is the reverse of the composition fallacy, which assumes great parts make a great whole. The division fallacy makes the opposite mistake, believing a strong whole guarantees strong parts. A best-selling book can have weak chapters. A thriving country can still have struggling citizens. A company with a stellar reputation may still have unqualified employees. It leads to false assumptions and flawed decision-making. A prestigious university doesn't mean every student is brilliant. A world-renowned orchestra doesn't mean every musician is exceptional. A hospital ranked as the best in the country doesn't mean every doctor is equally skilled. When we assume that a group's excellence extends to every member, we overlook variation, nuance, and complexity. The division fallacy can also lead to misplaced trust. If someone believes that all members of a respected profession are equally competent, they may be surprised when they encounter an underqualified doctor, lawyer, or professor. If a tech company is seen as innovative, people may assume that every product they release is groundbreaking, even when some fail. When we assume every part reflects the whole, we risk setting unrealistic expectations. To truly understand something, we must look beyond labels and examine the details. A strong whole doesn't guarantee strong parts, just as strong parts don't always create a strong whole. Instead of assuming, we must judge each piece individually and recognize that success is often more complex than it first appears. Middle ground fallacy. Two people argue over a historical event. One insists it never happened. The other presents documented evidence proving it did. A third person shrugs. The truth must be somewhere in the middle. But is it? Can a fact be halfway between reality and denial? That's the middle ground fallacy, the belief that the correct answer always lies between two opposing positions. If one side claims vaccines are harmful and another presents overwhelming scientific proof of their safety, the middle ground isn't partially harmful. If one person says the earth is round and another says it's flat, the truth isn't somewhat curved. Reality isn't always a compromise, and meeting halfway doesn't guarantee correctness. This fallacy thrives because balance feels fair. People want to be open-minded, and choosing the middle position seems like the most reasonable stance. It avoids conflict, allowing people to believe they are being neutral and thoughtful. But neutrality doesn't always lead to truth. If one side argues that smoking causes cancer and another insists it doesn't, splitting the difference suggests it might cause cancer only sometimes, which is not how science works. It also creates false credibility. When two positions are given equal weight, despite one being based on evidence and the other on misinformation, the falsehood gains legitimacy. This can be seen in media coverage that presents well-supported science alongside conspiracy theories, giving the illusion that both sides are equally valid. The mere presence of two views does not mean the truth is found between them. The middle ground fallacy can also be dangerous. If someone claims a harmful policy is unethical and another insists it is necessary, the middle ground might still allow harm. Some truths are absolute, and some arguments are not equally valid. Seeking compromise is often a good approach, but not when it forces people to accept incorrect or misleading ideas. Reality is not a negotiation, and truth is not always in the middle. Texas Sharpshooter Fallacy. A cowboy fires his gun randomly at the side of a barn. Later, he walks up, finds the densest cluster of bullet holes, and paints a target around it. Bullseye, he boasts. But did he really aim, or did he create the illusion of accuracy after the fact? What seems like a perfect shot is nothing more than a trick, one that turns randomness into meaning after the fact. That's Texas Sharpshooter Fallacy, focusing on similarities while ignoring differences, then declaring a meaningful pattern. A company highlights a few successful case studies while ignoring the failures. A psychic predicts vague events and later points to any matching occurrences as proof of their abilities. A researcher cherry-picks data that supports their theory while discarding conflicting results. Conspiracy theorists highlight a few historical coincidences while ignoring the vast amount of contradictory evidence. By selectively choosing what to highlight, they create an illusion of accuracy and causation. The pattern isn't real, it's just the result of ignoring everything that doesn't fit. It works because people love patterns. Our brains naturally seek connections, even where none exist. This tendency has come up before and will likely come up again because many fallacies rely on this same mental shortcut. Whether it's finding meaning in random events, assuming correlation implies causation, or mistaking popularity for truth, our pattern-seeking minds often lead us astray. The Texas Sharpshooter Fallacy is just one example of how our instinct to find order can sometimes create illusions instead of reality. A gambler believes they've found a winning streak, a person sees faces in the clouds, and a lottery player insists that certain numbers are due. The more convincing the pattern appears, the more we believe it must be real. But reality isn't just about what fits, it's about everything that doesn't. Ignoring outliers and contradictions doesn't make them disappear. True understanding requires looking at the full picture, not just the carefully selected details. This fallacy is especially common in marketing, politics, and pseudoscience. A supplement company boasts about customers who saw results but ignores those who didn't. A politician claims their policies led to economic growth, but disregards other influencing factors. A self-help guru promotes their method as life-changing, but only shares testimonials from those who succeeded, not from those who saw no results. The illusion of success is created not by facts, but by omission. The danger of the Texas Sharpshooter fallacy is that it leads to false conclusions. Businesses may rely on misleading data, investors may make poor financial decisions, and scientific research may become biased. It allows misinformation to spread, convincing people of trends, correlations, or causes that don't actually exist. Conspiracy theories thrive on this fallacy, connecting unrelated events to create a false narrative while ignoring overwhelming evidence that contradicts them. The next time someone claims a perfect record or an undeniable pattern, ask what's being left out. Are they looking at the entire dataset or just the parts that support their claim? True accuracy comes from looking at the whole picture, not just the convenient parts that fit the story. The real challenge isn't finding patterns, it's recognizing when they're real and when they're just tricks of selective thinking. Appeal to nature. A shopper picks up 2 bottles of juice. One is labeled 100% natural, the other simply fruit blend. Without checking the ingredients, they instinctively choose the one that claims to be natural. After all, natural must be better, right? But is it? That's appeal to nature. The fallacy of assuming that something is good, healthy, or superior simply because it is natural, and that anything artificial, processed, or man-made is inherently bad. It's a seductive idea. Natural foods must be healthier, herbal remedies must be safer, a chemical-free lifestyle must be the ideal, but nature isn't always kind. Poison ivy is natural. Deadly nightshade is also natural. Venom, viruses, and cyanide are all completely natural. Meanwhile, vaccines, antibiotics, and water purification are not natural, yet they have saved millions of lives. It works because the word natural evokes feelings of purity, health, and simplicity. Marketers exploit this by labeling products as organic, chemical-free, or all-natural, even when those terms are misleading. The reality is that everything is made of chemicals, and natural doesn't always mean safe or beneficial. Just because something comes from nature doesn't mean it's good for you, and just because something is synthetic doesn't mean it's harmful. This fallacy is especially common in health, nutrition, and environmental debates. Alternative medicine often claims superiority over pharmaceuticals simply because it's natural, even when there's no scientific evidence to support its effectiveness. Organic food advocates may insist that natural farming methods are always better for the environment, even when sustainable technological advancements can sometimes be more efficient. Environmental arguments sometimes assume that any human intervention in nature is bad, ignoring the fact that some unnatural innovations like renewable energy or reforestation projects have had positive impacts. The appeal to nature fallacy can also influence ethical debates. Some argue that certain behaviors, relationships, or ways of living are unnatural and therefore wrong. But nature is vast, diverse, and indifferent to human morality. Just because something doesn't occur in the wild doesn't mean it's unethical or harmful. If we define morality purely by what happens in nature, we'd have to accept behaviors that no civilized society would tolerate. The danger of this fallacy is that it replaces critical thinking with a false sense of security. Instead of evaluating products, medicines, or practices based on evidence, people rely on an emotional connection to the idea of naturalness. The next time something is marketed as better because it's natural, ask, is it actually better or does it just sound better? The truth isn't found in a label, it's found in the facts. Sunk cost fallacy. A man sits in a nearly empty movie theater, checking his watch. The film is terrible, but he's already spent $15 on the ticket. I can't leave now, he thinks. I'd be wasting my money. So he stays, enduring 2 more hours of boredom, throwing away his time just to justify the money he already lost. But the money is already gone, and staying doesn't get it back. All it does is turn a small loss into a bigger one. That's sunk cost fallacy, the irrational tendency to continue investing in something just because of what has already been spent, even when moving on would be the wiser choice. It happens in business, relationships, projects, and everyday decisions. A company keeps funding a failing product because they've already invested millions. A couple stays in an unhappy relationship because of the years they've spent together. A gambler keeps placing bets, hoping to win back what they've already lost. A student sticks with a major they hate because they've already taken several classes. Instead of cutting losses, people double down, refusing to admit that walking away is sometimes the smartest move. It works because people hate waste. Once we invest money, time, or effort into something, we feel compelled to see it through, regardless of whether it still makes sense. Our emotions override logic, convincing us that quitting is failure, when in reality, letting go can be the best decision. The more we've put in, the harder it is to walk away. The past cannot be changed, and losses cannot be undone. The only rational choice is to ask, what is the best option going forward? This fallacy also plays a role in major historical and political decisions. Governments have continued wars, economic policies, and large-scale projects simply because they have already poured billions into them, even when it became clear that the cost outweighed the benefits. Leaders fear admitting that a costly mistake was made, so they push forward, spending even more resources to avoid looking like they failed. But throwing good money after bad doesn't change the outcome. It just deepens the loss. The sunk cost fallacy appears in business when failing companies refuse to pivot, in politics when governments continue costly wars rather than admitting mistakes, and in personal life when people cling to bad decisions simply because they've already committed. But money spent, time lost, and energy wasted are gone forever. The key to overcoming this fallacy is recognizing that future decisions should be based on future benefits, not past investments. One way to break free from the sunk cost fallacy is to reframe the situation. If you had not invested anything yet, would you still make the same choice? If the answer is no, then it's likely time to walk away. Clinging to past investments at the expense of future well-being is like refusing to drop a heavy weight just because you've been carrying it for a long time. Sometimes, the smartest move isn't to keep going, it's to let go. Anecdotal evidence. A woman swears by a new herbal remedy. It cured my headaches instantly, she says. When asked about scientific studies, she shrugs. I don't need studies, I know it worked for me. But does one personal story prove the remedy works for everyone? Or could there be another explanation? Could it have been a placebo effect? Was the headache going to go away on its own? Without broader evidence, it's impossible to tell. That's anecdotal evidence, using personal experiences or isolated examples as proof while ignoring broader data. It's compelling because stories feel real, immediate, and persuasive. People trust their own experiences and those of people they know more than statistics or studies. A friend claims a diet works because they lost weight on it. A neighbor insists a home remedy cured their cold. A social media post claims a miracle treatment changed someone's life. But individual experiences don't prove a cause and effect relationship. They may be coincidences, influenced by other factors, or simply misremembered. The mind remembers dramatic stories far more vividly than data, making people believe in patterns that may not exist. It works because personal stories create strong emotional connections. Numbers and data feel cold, but a first-hand account feels vivid and relatable. That's why companies use testimonials in advertising. I used this product and my life changed. Even when scientific testing is lacking, political campaigns highlight one struggling family to argue for or against a policy, even if national statistics tell a different story. A news outlet interviews an individual who lost their job to automation and presents it as evidence of widespread economic collapse, even if employment rates remain stable. One person's story, no matter how moving, does not define reality. The anecdotal evidence fallacy can lead to false beliefs, bad decisions, and even public health risks. Just because one person claims that vaccines harmed them doesn't mean vaccines are dangerous. Just because one person drove home safely after drinking doesn't mean drinking and driving is safe. Just because someone survived a life-threatening illness after trying an unproven remedy doesn't mean the remedy worked. Other factors, such as medical treatment or sheer luck, may have played a role. One experience doesn't override scientific evidence gathered from thousands of cases. This fallacy is particularly dangerous in discussions about medicine, social issues, and safety policies. Many health scams prey on anecdotal evidence, convincing people to trust alternative treatments over proven medical interventions. Politicians use isolated crime stories to push tough-on-crime policies, even when crime rates are actually declining. Investors base decisions on a single success story rather than financial trends. Anecdotal evidence fuels fear, misinformation, and flawed reasoning. The key to avoiding this fallacy is to ask, does this story represent a larger pattern, or is it just one example? True knowledge comes from broad, well-tested data, not just one person's experience. Anecdotes can inspire curiosity, but they should never replace real evidence. Before believing a claim based on one person's story, consider the bigger picture. What does the data say? How many people had a different experience? A good argument isn't built on isolated stories, it's built on facts. Equivocation. A student argues, I have the right to free speech, so my professor can't lower my grade for what I wrote in my essay. But is that what right to free speech really means? Legally, it protects against government censorship, not consequences in a classroom. The term free speech is being used in two different ways, creating a misleading argument. This kind of wordplay is subtle but effective, allowing people to twist definitions to their advantage while avoiding direct contradiction. That's equivocation, using a word or phrase in multiple ways within the same argument, creating confusion and deception. A politician claims, I did not have relations with that person, using a narrow definition of relations while implying complete innocence. An ad declares, our product is light, without specifying whether it means low in calories, weightless, or a light color. A lawyer argues, no man is perfect, and only a man committed this crime. Therefore, no perfect being could have done it. The meaning of words shifts mid-argument, distorting the conclusion. The result? An argument that sounds logical but is built on shaky ground. It works because language is flexible. Words often have multiple meanings, and the mind naturally connects them, even when the context changes. This fallacy thrives in debates, law, advertising, and philosophy, where clever wording can make a weak argument seem strong. It can be intentional, used to mislead, or unintentional, a result of careless reasoning. Either way, it muddies discussions and distracts from clear thinking. When words shift meanings mid-conversation, arguments can feel solid while quietly moving the goalposts. The equivocation fallacy can influence politics, business, and even everyday conversations. A food company may advertise a product as organic, knowing consumers will associate it with health benefits, even if the term simply refers to a certification process. A salesperson may call a used car certified pre-owned, implying it's nearly new when the standards vary widely. Religious or philosophical debates often exploit this fallacy, subtly changing the meaning of words like truth, faith, or law to suit an argument. Legal documents and contracts are also notorious for carefully worded phrasing, where a single term may be interpreted in multiple ways to benefit one party over another. The danger of equivocation is that it allows misleading arguments to slip through unnoticed. People assume they understand what is being said, but subtle shifts in meaning alter the logic entirely. This is why precision in language is essential. Without it, debates turn into games of wordplay rather than honest discussion. The danger of equivocation is that it allows misleading arguments to slip through unnoticed. People assume they understand what is being said, but subtle shifts in meaning alter the logic entirely. This is why precision in language is essential. Without it, debates turn into games of wordplay rather than honest discussion. The key to avoiding this fallacy is to clarify definitions. When someone makes a bold claim, ask, Are they using this word the same way throughout? True reasoning depends on consistency. If a word's meaning shifts mid-argument, the logic collapses. Precision in language leads to precision in thought, and clear thinking leaves no room for deception. The more aware we are of how language can be manipulated, the harder it becomes to be misled by those who try to exploit it. False analogy. A businessman argues, running a country is just like running a business. A CEO makes decisions for the company, so a president should run the country the same way. But is a country really like a business? A business exists to make a profit, while a government serves its citizens. A company can fire unproductive employees, but a country can't just dismiss its struggling population. The comparison sounds logical, but the differences outweigh the similarities. Running a government involves complex social, legal, and ethical responsibilities that businesses never face. Simply put, a government is not a corporation, and treating it like one leads to flawed reasoning. That's false analogy, comparing two things as if they are alike in all key aspects when they are not. A lawyer claims, if we let people marry whoever they want, what's next? Letting people marry their pets? A politician argues, banning guns is like banning cars because both can cause harm. A fitness coach insists, your body is like a machine. If one part breaks, you replace it. These comparisons may seem compelling at first, but they overlook crucial differences. A legal marriage requires mutual consent. An animal cannot consent. Cars are designed for transportation, while guns are designed as weapons. The human body is not a machine. It heals, adapts, and functions in far more complex ways than an engine ever could. It works because analogies make ideas easier to grasp. A strong analogy helps explain complex topics by connecting them to something familiar. But when key differences are ignored, the analogy becomes misleading. Just because two things share some traits doesn't mean they are the same in every way. The problem with false analogies is that they often make extreme or misleading comparisons sound reasonable by framing them in familiar terms. This can be especially dangerous in political or ethical debates, where the stakes are high, and misrepresentations can influence public perception. The false analogy fallacy is common in politics, marketing, and everyday arguments. A diet company might claim, your body is like a car, fuel it right, and it will run perfectly, ignoring biological complexity. A speaker might say, a good relationship is like a bank account. You have to make deposits before you can withdraw, oversimplifying human emotions. Advertisers use it constantly. This skincare product works like a refreshing drink for your skin, or this mattress cradles you like a cloud. These comparisons are catchy, but ultimately misleading. False analogies can also be weaponized in debates to manipulate opinions. A politician might say, this tax is like theft, drawing a false moral equivalence between taxation and robbery. A speaker might argue, censorship is like slavery, exaggerating a policy's consequences. By likening one situation to another with vastly different stakes, false analogies distort reality and push emotional rather than rational responses. The key to spotting a false analogy is to ask, are the similarities relevant or do the differences matter more? A good analogy clarifies, but a bad one distorts. If two things share only surface-level traits but serve entirely different functions, then the analogy crumbles under careful inspection. When an argument relies on an oversimplified comparison, it's best to dig deeper and look beyond the surface. By questioning analogies and recognizing when they are stretched too far, we can avoid being misled by arguments that sound convincing but ultimately don't hold up to logic. Loaded question. A journalist turns to a politician and asks, why are you ignoring the needs of working families? The politician stammers, caught in a trap. No matter how they answer, they've already been accused of ignoring those families. Even denying the premise makes them look defensive. The question wasn't neutral. It was designed to force a certain assumption. That's loaded question, a question that contains a built-in presumption, making it impossible to answer without appearing guilty. Have you stopped lying to your spouse? Whether the person answers yes or no, they are trapped. The question assumes they have been lying in the first place. Why do you hate dogs? If the person tries to deny it, they still sound guilty of disliking dogs. Instead of allowing for an open discussion, a loaded question pressures the person into a narrow, misleading response. It works because people react to accusations emotionally. A loaded question creates an immediate sense of wrongdoing, forcing the person to defend themselves instead of addressing the real issue. Politicians use it to frame opponents, lawyers use it in cross-examinations, and media outlets use it to stir controversy. In personal conversations, it's a common tool for manipulation. "Why don't you ever think about my feelings?" assumes the other person never does, rather than leaving room for discussion. This fallacy is particularly effective in debates because it subtly controls the conversation. The person answering doesn't just have to respond, they also have to dismantle the hidden assumption. The trap works even better when the audience isn't aware of the tactic. If a journalist asks a CEO, "Why did your company choose profits over safety?" it instantly paints the company in a negative light. Even if the CEO provides a rational explanation, the question has already influenced public perception. The loaded question fallacy is particularly dangerous because it shuts down honest debate. Instead of seeking truth, it pressures people into a defensive position. It often appears in social issues and moral debates. "Why do you support policies that hurt the poor?" assumes harm is intentional. "Why are you against progress?" assumes disagreement is rooted in a refusal to improve. These kinds of questions do not allow for thoughtful discussion. They force an opponent to fight against a misleading premise, instead of arguing their actual position. The best way to counter it is to challenge the assumption behind the question. That question assumes something that isn't true. Instead of answering directly, a person can reframe the discussion by exposing the bias in the question itself. Recognizing the trap allows for a shift back to reality and avoids being cornered by an unfair question. Learning to spot loaded questions is an essential skill in critical thinking, helping to separate genuine inquiry from rhetorical manipulation. Appeal to ignorance. A late-night talk show guest leans in and says, "There's no proof that aliens don't exist, so they must be out there." The audience nods, intrigued. But is a lack of evidence really evidence? Just because something hasn't been disproven doesn't mean it's true. Similarly, someone might argue, "There's no proof that telepathy doesn't work, so it must be real." But an absence of proof is just that, an absence. It tells us nothing about what is or isn't true. That's appeal to ignorance, arguing that a claim must be true because it hasn't been proven false, or that something must be false because it hasn't been proven true. A conspiracy theorist claims no one has ever proven that the government isn't hiding secret experiments. A skeptic argues there's no evidence that ghosts exist, so they must not be real. Both assume that ignorance itself, an absence of proof, is enough to settle the argument. But real knowledge requires more than just the lack of a contradiction. It works because uncertainty makes people uncomfortable. If there's no clear answer, we feel compelled to fill in the gaps with certainty, either declaring something true or false based purely on the lack of information. This fallacy is especially common in debates about science, politics, and the supernatural. People may argue that alternative medicine works simply because it hasn't been disproven, or that a political scandal must be real because no evidence has surfaced to deny it. Superstitions and urban legends thrive on this fallacy. If no one can prove a myth wrong, it continues to circulate as possible truth. This fallacy also plays a role in legal discussions and historical debates. A defendant might say, "There's no proof that I was at the crime scene, so I must be innocent," ignoring the fact that a lack of evidence doesn't confirm innocence. Likewise, a historian might argue, "There's no proof that this civilization didn't have advanced technology, so maybe they did." While open-mindedness is valuable, assuming something is true just because it hasn't been disproven is intellectually lazy. The appeal to ignorance fallacy is dangerous because it shifts the burden of proof. Instead of supporting their claim with evidence, a person demands that others disprove it. But proving a negative is often impossible. The fact that we haven't found evidence for something doesn't mean it's real or fake. The only rational approach is to base beliefs on positive evidence, not on the absence of disproof. Science, for example, does not assume something exists until it has been observed and verified. If we assumed everything was true until disproven, we would have to believe in every myth, conspiracy, and rumor ever told. The next time someone claims, "You can't prove me wrong, so I must be right," ask, is there actual evidence supporting this claim, or just an empty space where proof should be? If a claim relies purely on a lack of contradiction, then it holds no more weight than a guess. Real truth isn't found in ignorance, it's found in facts, testing, and verifiable evidence. The difference between speculation and knowledge is the presence of real, measurable proof. Appeal to tradition. A company resists change, arguing, "We've always done it this way, so it must be the best way." But is longevity proof of quality? Just because something has been done a certain way for generations doesn't mean it's the right or most effective approach. Traditions can be valuable, but they shouldn't be unquestioned. Some traditions endure because they serve a useful purpose, while others remain simply because no one has challenged them. The key is knowing the difference. That's appeal to tradition, arguing that something is good, right, or better simply because it has been practiced for a long time. Marriage has always been between a man and a woman, so it must stay that way. We've used this method for centuries, so there's no need to change. This festival has existed for hundreds of years, so it must continue. The argument assumes that age alone grants legitimacy, ignoring whether the practice still holds up to modern understanding or new evidence. If time alone were proof of effectiveness, then ancient medical treatments like bloodletting would still be widely used. It works because people find comfort in tradition. Change is unsettling, and things that have lasted for generations seem trustworthy. A long-standing custom feels like a foundation of stability, and questioning it can feel like attacking the identity of a culture, a family, or a society. But time alone doesn't determine truth. Slavery, bloodletting, and alchemy were all long-standing traditions until they were rightfully abandoned. Just because something has been done for centuries doesn't mean it's wise, ethical, or effective. The appeal to tradition fallacy is common in politics, education, and social norms. A company resists innovation by claiming, "This is how we've always operated." A school insists on outdated teaching methods because it worked in the past. A legal system clings to old laws, refusing reform because we've always had them. In some cases, traditions persist because they genuinely work, but in others they remain out of habit, even when better alternatives exist. For example, the QWERTY keyboard layout was designed to slow typists down on old typewriters, yet it remains the standard today, despite more efficient layouts being available. Tradition can offer wisdom, but it can also be a barrier to progress when it's followed blindly. Some of the greatest advancements in history came from questioning old ways and finding new solutions. Scientific discoveries, social reforms, and technological innovations often require breaking away from traditional thinking. However, not all traditions need to be discarded. Some hold cultural, historical, or emotional value. The challenge is knowing when a tradition serves a meaningful purpose and when it simply persists because no one has questioned it. The key to overcoming this fallacy is to ask, does this practice still make sense today? A tradition's age doesn't make it right or wrong. Its effectiveness, ethics, and relevance do. The best ideas withstand scrutiny, not just time. If a tradition is worth keeping, it should be able to stand on its own merits, not just on the weight of history. Questioning traditions isn't about rejecting the past. It's about ensuring the future is built on the best possible foundations. Appeal to novelty. A tech company unveils its latest smartphone. It's the newest model, so it must be the best one yet, the advertisement claims. But does new automatically mean better? Just because something is recent doesn't mean it outperforms what came before. Progress is real, but not every change is an improvement. Some innovations refine what works, while others introduce unnecessary complexity or abandon valuable features in the name of modernity. That's appeal to novelty, the assumption that something is superior simply because it is new or modern. This is the latest diet, so it must be more effective than old ones. Our newest education system will revolutionize learning. This brand new medication is better than all previous treatments. The claim assumes that newness alone guarantees improvement without considering whether the change is meaningful or beneficial, without evidence. Assuming that an update or new method is automatically an upgrade is a misleading way to justify decisions. It works because people associate progress with innovation. We're wired to believe that newer means smarter, faster, or more advanced. Marketing exploits this tendency. Brands release new and improved versions of products, even when the differences are minimal or cosmetic. Consumers are drawn to updated packaging, redesigned logos, and modernized branding, even when the core product remains the same. But history shows that newer isn't always better. Some modern trends fade away, while older ideas, methods, and technologies remain useful. Vinyl records made a comeback despite digital streaming. Ancient architectural techniques still outperform modern construction in some cases. Many older books, films, and philosophies remain timeless, proving that progress doesn't always mean abandoning the past. The appeal to novelty fallacy appears in technology, business, science, and social policies. A new app promises to make life easier, yet its features are less functional than what existed before. A company switches to an innovative management style that causes more confusion than productivity. A political movement insists that tradition must be abandoned simply because it's old, even when older systems worked well. Even in medicine, the newest drug isn't always the best. Some older treatments remain more effective, while newer ones may have unforeseen side effects. True progress comes from testing and evaluating changes, not blindly assuming that the latest version is always superior. The best way to avoid this fallacy is to ask, is it actually better or just newer? Novelty alone isn't proof of quality. While change can be positive, it should be embraced based on merit, not just because it's different from what came before. Real progress is measured by results, not by a timestamp. Instead of assuming that the latest version is automatically an improvement, critical thinkers should ask, what does this change actually add, and does it solve real problems? If the only argument for an update is that it's new, then the change might be more about perception than actual value. Appeal to consequences. A man refuses to believe a scientific theory. If that were true, then life would have no meaning, he argues. I refuse to accept such a depressing idea. But reality doesn't change just because we dislike its implications. The truth remains the truth, regardless of whether we find it comforting or unsettling. Accepting or rejecting something based on its emotional impact does not make it any more or less real. That's appeal to consequences, arguing that a claim must be true or false based on its potential consequences rather than on evidence. If evolution were true, then humans wouldn't be special, so it must be false. If my political candidate lost fairly, that would mean our system is broken, so they must have been cheated. If climate change is real, then we would need to change our way of life, so it must be exaggerated. These arguments don't engage with facts. They rely on personal preference, fear, or wishful thinking to dismiss reality. When truth becomes dependent on what is comfortable rather than what is demonstrable, rational discussion breaks down. It works because people want the world to align with their values and desires. Difficult truths challenge beliefs, identity, and security. People resist ideas that make them uncomfortable, preferring conclusions that reaffirm their worldview. But truth isn't determined by how much we like it. Believing something because it's comforting doesn't make it real, just as rejecting something because it's unpleasant doesn't make it false. Reality is indifferent to our hopes, fears, and emotions, and discovering the truth often requires confronting ideas that may be unsettling or inconvenient. The appeal to consequences fallacy appears in debates about science, politics, religion, and ethics. A person argues against artificial intelligence not because of technical flaws, but because they fear its impact on jobs. A student rejects a historical fact because it makes their nation look bad. A religious leader dismisses new research because it contradicts long-held beliefs. These arguments avoid addressing whether the claim itself is true and instead focus on whether the consequences are desirable or undesirable. The fallacy is also common in moral debates, where someone might argue, if morality isn't given by a higher power, then life has no ultimate purpose, so morality must come from a higher power. But whether something is meaningful or purposeless doesn't determine whether it is true. The best way to avoid this fallacy is to ask, is this argument based on evidence or just on whether I like the outcome? Truth doesn't bend to convenience. Facts remain facts, no matter how much we wish they were different. Instead of rejecting an idea because of its consequences, critical thinkers focus on whether the evidence supports it, because reality doesn't care about our preferences. Accepting difficult truths allows for better decisions, while denying them only delays the inevitable. The more we focus on what is, rather than what we wish were true, the more clearly we can see the world as it really is. False balance. A news anchor introduces a debate. Tonight we discuss climate change. On one side, a climate scientist. On the other, a businessman who says it's all a hoax. We'll let you decide. The audience assumes both views are equally valid. But are they? One side is backed by overwhelming scientific consensus, while the other is based on personal belief. Presenting them as equal misleads the public into thinking there's real controversy when there isn't. That's false balance, also known as both-sidesism, the fallacy of giving two sides equal weight, even when the evidence overwhelmingly supports one side. Doctors say smoking causes cancer, but one researcher disagrees, so the jury is still out. Most historians agree this event happened, but one blog says otherwise, so we must consider both. Scientists confirm vaccines are safe, but some parents say they aren't, so both views deserve equal airtime. In each case, a well-supported position is treated as if it's just as uncertain as a fringe belief. It works because people value fairness. Presenting both sides seems balanced, even when the sides are not equal in credibility. Journalists and media outlets often fall into this trap, giving platforms to conspiracy theories, fringe science, or misinformation under the guise of neutrality. But truth isn't a matter of opinion, it's based on evidence. Giving an unsupported view the same legitimacy as a factually established position creates confusion rather than clarity. False balance is often confused with false equivalence, but there is a key difference. False equivalence occurs when two things are falsely compared as if they are similar in nature when they are not, such as equating minor ethical missteps with large-scale corruption. False balance, on the other hand, presents two sides of an argument as equally valid, even when one is overwhelmingly supported by evidence and the other is not. Both fallacies mislead people, but false balance specifically distorts the perception of credibility. The false balance fallacy is especially dangerous in science, history, and public policy. It allows misinformation to spread by making it seem like a valid perspective. Climate change denial, anti-vaccine rhetoric, and pseudo-history all thrive on false balance. When false claims are treated as serious alternatives to well-supported facts, people struggle to distinguish between truth and misinformation. The best way to counter false balance is to ask, does this argument have real evidence, or is it being propped up for the sake of appearing fair? Balance should come from truth, not from giving equal weight to unequally supported ideas. True fairness is not about presenting both sides, it's about presenting reality. Appeal to flattery. A salesperson smiles and says, "You seem like someone with great taste. This watch would be perfect for someone as stylish as you." Flattered, the customer feels special, more likely to trust the salesperson and make a purchase. But does their compliment make the watch any better, or is it just a tactic? Flattery creates an emotional connection, making the person feel recognized and appreciated, which lowers their defenses against persuasion. That's appeal to flattery, using compliments and praise to manipulate someone into accepting an argument or making a decision. You're such a smart investor. I know you'll see why this stock is a great opportunity. A person as open-minded as you will agree with me on this issue. Only someone with a refined palate can truly appreciate this wine. The flattery isn't just a compliment. It's a tool to bypass critical thinking and make the person feel valued, nudging them toward agreement. The strategy is especially effective because people tend to trust those who make them feel good. It works because people enjoy feeling good about themselves. Compliments boost confidence, and when someone flatters us, we instinctively want to maintain the positive image they've given us. This fallacy is common in sales, marketing, and persuasion. Advertisers use slogans like, "For those who demand the best," to make customers feel superior. Politicians flatter voters to gain support with slogans such as, "The hardworking people of this country know what's right." In conversations, people may use flattery to influence opinions without offering real evidence. Employers may use flattery to persuade employees to take on more work, making them feel indispensable rather than fairly compensating them. A professor might subtly use it to encourage students to adopt a particular viewpoint. Only the brightest students recognize the importance of this theory. These examples show how praise can be used as a tool of persuasion rather than a genuine compliment. The appeal to flattery fallacy is deceptive because it replaces logic with emotion. When decisions are influenced by compliments rather than facts, the argument itself may not hold any weight. This fallacy can be dangerous when it leads people to ignore red flags, make poor investments, or support weak arguments simply because they enjoy the way they are being spoken to. The next time someone appeals to your ego, ask, "Is this argument strong, or am I just enjoying the compliment?" Real decisions should be based on reason, not on how good they make us feel. Recognizing when flattery is being used as manipulation allows us to stay grounded in rational thinking rather than emotional influence. Appeal to pity. A student, realizing they failed an exam, approaches their professor. "If I don't pass this class, I'll lose my scholarship and disappoint my family. Please, can't you give me a few extra points?" The professor hesitates, feeling sympathy, but does the student's hardship change the fact that they didn't earn a passing grade? This is a classic example of ad misericordiam, the Latin term for an appeal to pity, where an emotional plea is used to sway judgment instead of relevant evidence. That's appeal to pity, using emotions, particularly sympathy and guilt, to persuade someone to accept an argument rather than relying on logic or evidence. "You can't fire me. I have a family to support. I deserve this job because I've had such a hard life. You should vote for me because I've overcome so much adversity." While personal struggles can be real and moving, they don't necessarily justify the conclusion being argued. A compelling story doesn't make a weak argument strong, and suffering alone doesn't prove merit. It works because human beings are naturally empathetic. We don't want to see others suffer, and when faced with someone's hardship, we feel compelled to help. However, making decisions based on pity rather than facts can lead to poor reasoning. A courtroom shouldn't acquit a guilty person just because they had a difficult childhood. A company shouldn't hire an unqualified candidate just because they've been through tough times. Emotional appeals can cloud judgment, leading to choices based on guilt rather than merit. The appeal to pity fallacy is often used in advertising, politics, and personal arguments. A charity commercial might show heartbreaking images of suffering animals, implying that donating is the only moral choice. A politician may emphasize their personal hardships to gain sympathy rather than discussing their policies. A defendant in court might play up their tragic background to gain leniency, even if the evidence is stacked against them. In everyday life, people might manipulate others by making them feel bad. "If you were a good friend, you'd help me out." But sympathy alone doesn't make an argument valid. This fallacy can be especially powerful when it taps into guilt. If rejecting an emotional plea makes someone feel heartless, they may ignore logic to avoid discomfort. However, fairness means applying the same standard to everyone, not letting emotions override reason. The best way to counter this fallacy is to separate emotions from reasoning. Feeling compassion is important, but decisions should be made based on fairness, facts, and logic. The next time someone makes an emotional appeal, ask, does their hardship actually prove their point, or is it just a distraction from the real issue? True fairness comes from balancing empathy with reason. Compassion should guide kindness, but it should not replace critical thinking. Appeal to fear. A politician steps up to the podium and warns, if you don't vote for me, the economy will collapse and crime will skyrocket. The crowd stiffens. The message is clear. Not voting for this candidate isn't just a choice, it's a danger. But is there actual evidence to support these claims, or is fear being used as a weapon? Fear bypasses logical analysis, pushing people to act out of urgency rather than reason. That's appeal to fear, using threats, anxiety, or worst-case scenarios to manipulate someone into accepting an argument, even when the evidence doesn't support it. If you don't buy this security system, your family will be at risk. If we don't ban this technology, it will destroy society. If you don't support this policy, your children's future is doomed. The argument isn't built on facts, but on the fear of what could happen if the other choice is made. Fear makes people more reactive, often leading to rushed or irrational decisions rather than careful evaluation. It works because fear is a powerful motivator. When people feel threatened, they focus on avoiding harm rather than analyzing the logic of an argument. Fear-based reasoning is common in politics, marketing, and the media. News outlets sensationalize dangers to keep viewers engaged. Advertisers use fear to sell products. Use this toothpaste, or you'll get cavities. Leaders stir fear of outsiders to rally support. By triggering an emotional reaction, these arguments bypass critical thinking and push people toward a specific conclusion. Once fear is activated, the rational part of the brain takes a back seat, making people more susceptible to persuasion and manipulation. The appeal to fear fallacy is especially dangerous because it encourages decisions based on emotion rather than facts. It can lead to paranoia, irrational policies, and unnecessary restrictions. A government might justify mass surveillance by exaggerating national security threats. A company might pressure customers into unnecessary purchases by making them afraid of hypothetical dangers. A parent might oppose a new teaching method, not because it's ineffective, but because they fear it could ruin education. A health guru might claim that processed foods will lead to certain disease without scientific backing. In every case, the fear itself becomes the argument, rather than evidence or reason. The goal is not to provide proof, but to create enough panic that people stop questioning the logic behind the claim. This fallacy is often used alongside other fallacies we have discussed before, such as false dilemma, which is framing an issue as having only two extreme choices, or slippery slope, suggesting that one action will inevitably lead to catastrophe. By combining fear with these techniques, an argument becomes even harder to refute, as people are forced into a mindset of self-preservation rather than rational consideration. The best way to counter this fallacy is to ask, is this claim supported by real evidence, or is it just playing on fear? Instead of reacting emotionally, look for facts. Is there credible data supporting the danger being presented? Is the risk being exaggerated? Fear can alert us to real dangers, but it should never be a substitute for reason. The strongest arguments stand on truth, not terror. The more we recognize fear tactics for what they are, the more we can resist being manipulated by them. Appeal to spite. A man watches a political debate. One candidate proposes a new healthcare policy, but instead of addressing its merits, a commentator says, "Are you really going to support them after what their party did to you last election?" The argument isn't about logic or policy, it's about holding on to resentment. The discussion shifts from evaluating the policy itself to stoking old wounds, reinforcing division rather than fostering rational decision-making. That's appeal to spite, using bitterness, resentment, or past grievances to dismiss an argument rather than engaging with its validity. Don't buy from that company. Remember how they raised prices last year? Why should we listen to him? He embarrassed us in that meeting last time. You shouldn't support that new initiative. Those people never supported us before. These arguments aren't about whether something is true, fair, or beneficial. Instead, they appeal to lingering anger or a sense of betrayal, turning the discussion into a matter of retribution rather than reasoned evaluation. It works because resentment is a powerful motivator. People naturally hold grudges, and emotions like spite or revenge can override rational thinking. When a decision is framed as a way to get back at someone, people become more focused on settling a score than making a logical choice. This fallacy often appears in politics, business rivalries, and personal relationships. A politician might urge voters to reject a policy simply because it was proposed by an opponent. A company might encourage customers to switch brands by reminding them of a competitor's past mistakes. A friend might pressure someone into taking sides in an argument by stirring up old resentments. Even in historical disputes, nations have prolonged conflicts based on past grievances rather than focusing on present realities. This fallacy is also prevalent in workplace dynamics and social interactions. An employee might refuse to collaborate with a colleague because of a previous disagreement, even if working together would benefit the company. A sports team might reject hiring a talented coach simply because they once worked for a rival team. Spite can creep into any aspect of decision-making, turning what should be a practical evaluation into an emotional reaction rooted in the past. The appeal to spite fallacy is dangerous because it shifts the focus from facts to feelings of hostility. It fosters division, prevents progress, and can lead to poor decision-making simply to satisfy a personal grudge. Important decisions should be based on reason, not personal resentment. The best way to counter this fallacy is to ask, am I rejecting this idea because it's flawed or just because I dislike the person or group behind it? True fairness comes from judging ideas on their merits, not on past conflicts. Spite may feel satisfying in the moment, but it rarely leads to good decisions. The more we allow reason to guide our choices, the less likely we are to fall victim to emotional manipulation. Appeal to ridicule. A scientist explains a complex theory, and instead of addressing the evidence, their opponent smirks. "Oh, so you expect me to believe we came from monkeys? That's just ridiculous." The argument isn't about facts, it's about making an idea sound laughable so people dismiss it without considering its validity. Instead of responding with logic, the opponent relies on sarcasm and exaggeration to make the idea appear absurd. This tactic doesn't engage with the argument itself, it simply waves it away with mockery. That's appeal to ridicule, mocking an idea instead of engaging with it logically. "Oh, sure, let's just give everyone free healthcare and see how that works out. So you think we should listen to scientists about climate change? What's next? Asking fortune tellers for stock advice? Believing in evolution is like believing in magic." Instead of refuting the argument with facts, ridicule is used to make the opposing viewpoint seem absurd or foolish. The goal isn't to disprove the idea, it's to make people feel embarrassed for even considering it. It works because people fear being laughed at. If an idea is framed as ridiculous, those who support it may hesitate to defend it, worried they'll look foolish. When an argument is dismissed with mockery, it forces people into a defensive position, making them more likely to retreat rather than continue engaging. This fallacy is common in debates, politics, media, and even everyday discussions. A politician might dismiss an opponent's policy with sarcasm instead of countering it with evidence. A talk show host might mock an academic study rather than explain why it might be flawed. A person in a discussion might roll their eyes and say, "Oh great, another conspiracy theorist," without addressing the actual points being made. This tactic is particularly effective when combined with an audience. If one person ridicules an argument in front of a crowd, others may be hesitant to challenge them, fearing they will also become the target of mockery. This is why appeal to ridicule is so often used in public debates, online discussions, and social settings. It leverages social pressure to silence disagreement. In some cases, this fallacy can be paired with Straw Man Fallacy, where an argument is distorted into an exaggerated, absurd version before being ridiculed. For example, someone arguing for regulations on gun ownership might be met with, "Oh, so you just want the government to take away all our rights and ban everything? What's next? Outlawing kitchen knives?" This misrepresents the original argument and makes it seem ridiculous, even though the actual claim was far more reasonable. The appeal to ridicule fallacy is dangerous because it shuts down rational discussion. Instead of debating facts, it relies on embarrassment, making people reluctant to challenge the mockery. It discourages independent thinking by creating a hostile environment where people are afraid of looking foolish. Over time, this fallacy can contribute to the spread of misinformation, as serious ideas are dismissed without being properly examined. The best way to counter this fallacy is to recognize that laughter isn't an argument. Ask, is this idea actually being addressed, or is it just being dismissed with sarcasm? If an argument is truly weak, it should be easy to disprove without mockery. Instead of being intimidated by ridicule, challenge the person to explain why they think the argument is wrong. If they can't provide a serious response, it's a sign that their mockery is a distraction rather than a valid criticism. When someone resorts to ridicule, it's often a sign that they don't have a strong counterargument. Rational discussion should be based on evidence and reasoning, not fear of looking foolish. Appeal to money. A man walks into a car dealership and points to the most expensive model. "This has to be the best one," he says. "It costs twice as much as the others." But is price really an indicator of quality? Or is he assuming that higher cost automatically means superiority? This assumption is common, yet it ignores the reality that price often includes factors unrelated to quality, such as branding, marketing, or artificial scarcity. That's appeal to money, the fallacy of assuming that something is better, more valuable, or more correct simply because it costs more, or that something is inferior because it is cheaper. The most expensive university must provide the best education. This wine costs $500 a bottle, so it must taste amazing. A billionaire's opinion is more valid than an average person's. Price and value aren't always connected, yet this fallacy leads people to equate wealth with quality, truth, or intelligence. It also works in reverse. People may dismiss something as bad simply because it's inexpensive, even if it provides excellent value. It works because people associate cost with prestige, exclusivity, and desirability. Luxury brands market themselves this way, creating the illusion that higher prices automatically mean higher quality. But history shows that expensive things aren't always better. Some of the best books are free in libraries. Some of the greatest artists died poor, and expensive treatments aren't always more effective than affordable ones. Meanwhile, a low price doesn't always mean something is worthless. Affordable innovations, efficient designs, and budget-friendly solutions often outperform their expensive counterparts. Many technological advancements started as low-cost alternatives to overpriced solutions, but later proved superior. This fallacy also plays a major role in social perceptions and decision-making. A wealthy person's opinion may be given undue weight in a discussion simply because of their financial success, even if their expertise has nothing to do with the topic at hand. In education, students may be convinced that an expensive private university automatically provides a better education than an affordable public one, despite factors like faculty quality, curriculum, and student outcomes being far more important. In the world of art and collectibles, some people assume that an expensive painting is automatically more meaningful or aesthetically superior than a lesser-known work with a modest price tag. Price is often a reflection of demand and marketing rather than inherent worth. The appeal to money fallacy appears in business, education, marketing, and personal judgments. A person might assume an expensive private school provides a better education than a well-rated public school. A customer might dismiss a cheaper phone as low quality, even if it has the same features as a premium model. A politician might argue that a wealthy donor's perspective matters more than that of the working class. Some even assume that an expensive wedding or engagement ring is a stronger sign of love, despite studies showing no correlation between the cost of a wedding and long-term marital success. While money can be an indicator of resources, it does not inherently prove worth, correctness, or truth. The best way to counter this fallacy is to ask, does the price actually reflect quality or just perceived value? True worth is measured by function, effectiveness, and substance, not just a dollar sign. Just because something is expensive doesn't mean it's better, and just because something is cheap doesn't mean it lacks value. The real question should always be, what does this price actually represent? Looking beyond cost to real quality and utility is the key to avoiding this misleading assumption. Appeal to common practice. A businessman defends his company's decision to underpay employees. Every company in the industry does it. That's just how business works. But does widespread behavior make something right? Just because something is commonly done doesn't mean it is ethical, fair, or logical. Normalizing an action through repetition does not justify it, yet many people fall into this trap when they assume that commonality equals correctness. That's appeal to common practice, the fallacy of assuming that something is acceptable, justified, or correct simply because it is commonly done. Everyone cheats on their taxes, so it must be fine. People have always exaggerated their resumes to get jobs. Most drivers speed, so it's not really a big deal. Instead of proving that an action is right or reasonable, this argument simply points to its popularity as justification. If enough people engage in a practice, it starts to feel like an unspoken rule, making it easier to ignore the ethical concerns behind it. It works because people find comfort in the familiar. If many people do something, it creates the illusion that it must be acceptable. This fallacy is common in workplace cultures, legal justifications, and social behaviors. A student caught plagiarizing might argue, everyone copies homework sometimes. A politician might justify corruption by saying, this is how politics has always worked. A company might continue an unfair pricing model because all competitors do it. People assume that if something is widespread, it must have been tested and accepted as the right way to do things, even when it's fundamentally flawed. This fallacy is especially powerful because it exploits social conformity. When people see others engaging in a behavior, they feel pressure to go along with it, whether or not they actually believe it is right. This is how toxic corporate cultures, unethical legal loopholes, and social injustices persist over time. A doctor might continue prescribing an outdated treatment because that's what everyone else does. A judge might uphold a biased legal precedent because courts have always ruled this way. A corporation might exploit workers because that's the industry standard. The assumption is that because something has been done for a long time, questioning it is unnecessary. The appeal to common practice fallacy is dangerous because it allows unethical, harmful, or illogical behaviors to persist simply because they are widespread. It discourages critical thinking and reform. Many historical injustices, from segregation to unsafe labor conditions, were once considered normal. If common practice were always right, progress would never happen. If everyone in the past had accepted the status quo without question, democracy, civil rights, and scientific advancements would have never occurred. The fact that a practice is common does not mean it should be continued. This fallacy is often paired with the appeal to tradition, where something is defended not just because it is common now, but because it has been common for generations. Both assume that mere repetition is evidence of correctness rather than evaluating the practice on its actual merits. However, appeal to common practice focuses on the present, arguing that because many people do something now, it must be acceptable, whereas appeal to tradition invokes the past as justification. The best way to counter this fallacy is to ask, would this be acceptable if only one person did it, or am I just excusing it because it's common? Imagine if only a single company underpaid its employees, or if only one driver broke traffic laws. The fact that many people do something does not change its ethical or logical standing. Right and wrong are determined by logic, ethics, and fairness, not by how many people engage in a behavior. Just because something is widespread doesn't mean it should be accepted. Questioning norms is the first step toward progress, and challenging common practices allows for meaningful change rather than blind conformity. Appeal to motive. A journalist presents evidence for a new environmental policy, but their opponent dismisses it outright. You're just saying that because you work for an environmental group. Instead of addressing the argument itself, they attack the speaker's supposed motive, as if having an interest in a topic makes someone automatically wrong. This tactic shifts attention away from the argument's validity and onto the person presenting it, creating an illusion that the motive is more important than the reasoning itself. That's appeal to motive. The fallacy of dismissing an argument based on the perceived motivations of the person making it, rather than addressing the argument itself. Of course, scientists say climate change is real. They get funding for their research. You only support this law because it benefits your industry. The teacher is against school budget cuts because they just want a raise. In each case, the focus shifts away from the actual reasoning and onto the person's supposed intentions, as if their motive alone invalidates their point. This kind of reasoning assumes that if someone stands to gain from something, their position must be dishonest, even if their claim is entirely valid. It works because people are naturally skeptical of bias. If someone seems to have something to gain from their argument, we instinctively question their sincerity. While motives can sometimes influence opinions, they don't determine whether an argument is true or false. A scientist can benefit from research funding and be correct about climate change. A teacher can want better pay and have valid concerns about school funding. A lawyer may want to win a case and be arguing a legally sound position. Rejecting a claim solely because of the speaker's interests ignores the strength of the evidence itself and prevents constructive debate. The appeal to motive fallacy is common in politics, business, and debates on social issues. A politician might dismiss a journalist's criticism by saying, "They're just trying to sell newspapers." A company might ignore worker complaints by arguing, "They just want more money." A criminal defendant might claim, "The prosecutor is only pressing charges because they want a promotion." A CEO accused of environmental violations might say, "Activists are only attacking us because they have an anti-business agenda." In all these cases, the focus is on discrediting the speaker rather than examining the argument. This fallacy is also closely related to ad hominem, where an argument is dismissed by attacking the person making it rather than the argument itself. However, appeal to motive specifically targets why someone is making a claim rather than addressing the claim's accuracy. While it is fair to question conflicts of interest, the presence of a motive does not automatically invalidate an argument. The best way to counter this fallacy is to ask, even if they do have a motive, is their argument still valid? Truth isn't determined by a person's intentions, it's determined by facts and reasoning. Instead of focusing on why someone believes something, focus on whether what they're saying is actually correct. Motives may exist, but they do not replace evidence. An argument should stand or fall based on logic, not on speculation about a speaker's personal interests. Appeal to probability. A gambler watches the roulette wheel and says, "It's landed on red 5 times in a row. Black is bound to come up next." But is it? Just because something is likely doesn't mean it is certain to happen. Probability does not guarantee an outcome, yet many people mistakenly believe that past events influence future probabilities in independent random events. This misunderstanding fuels bad decisions, false assumptions, and unnecessary anxiety. That's appeal to probability. The fallacy of assuming that because something could happen or is statistically likely, it will happen. If you don't buy insurance, you'll definitely regret it someday. There's a 70% chance of rain, so we're definitely going to get soaked. Most startups fail, so yours is doomed from the start. In each case, probability is mistaken for inevitability, leading to false conclusions. A statistical likelihood does not mean an absolute certainty, and assuming so can lead to poor decision-making. A statistical likelihood does not mean an absolute certainty, and assuming so can lead to poor decision-making. It works because people rely on patterns and expectations to make sense of the world. We see trends and assume they must continue in a predictable way, even when randomness or uncertainty plays a role. This fallacy is especially common in gambling, risk assessment, and decision-making. A person might avoid flying because planes crash sometimes, ignoring that the actual probability is incredibly low. A job seeker might assume, "I won't get hired. Most applicants don't make it," without considering their individual qualifications. Investors might believe that because a stock has consistently risen in value, it must continue to rise, ignoring the unpredictability of financial markets. These errors stem from the tendency to conflate probability with certainty, leading people to overestimate or underestimate risk. This fallacy also affects personal decision-making. Someone might avoid starting a business because most fail within the first 5 years, without realizing that factors like preparation, industry, and strategy play significant roles. A person might assume that because their family has a history of heart disease, they are guaranteed to develop it as well, neglecting lifestyle choices that could reduce their risk. Fear-based assumptions derived from probability can prevent people from taking worthwhile risks or engaging in beneficial opportunities simply because they misinterpret statistical likelihoods as unavoidable realities. The appeal to probability fallacy is dangerous because it leads to flawed reasoning and poor decisions. Assuming an outcome is certain can cause overconfidence, unnecessary fear, or inaction. In business, it can make entrepreneurs give up too early or take reckless risks. In science, it can lead to misinterpretations of data where researchers assume that a correlation automatically implies causation. In daily life, it can lead to missed opportunities, unwise investments, or unnecessary worry. This fallacy is also commonly paired with gambler's fallacy, where people assume that previous independent events influence future ones. For example, in a coin toss, someone might think that because heads has appeared multiple times in a row, tails is due to happen next. While it's true that probability informs decision-making, it cannot predict with certainty what will happen in any given instance. Recognizing this difference is essential to avoiding faulty logic. The best way to counter this fallacy is to ask, is this outcome guaranteed or just probable? Probability can provide useful insights, but it should never replace logical analysis. The likelihood of an event occurring is not the same as its certainty, and failing to recognize this difference can lead to irrational fears, bad investments, and flawed reasoning. A better approach is to weigh probability alongside context, evidence, and independent factors, ensuring that conclusions are based on logic rather than assumption. Appeal to force. An employee is called into their boss's office. The conversation starts off friendly, but then comes the ultimatum. "I assume you'll support my proposal at the next meeting. It would be unfortunate if you lost your promotion over this." No debate, no discussion, just a subtle threat wrapped in politeness. The argument isn't about facts or logic. It's about power and control, making compliance seem like the only safe choice. That's appeal to force, a tactic that replaces reasoning with coercion. Instead of persuading someone with evidence, it pressures them into agreement through intimidation or the threat of negative consequences. Agree with me, or you'll regret it. Support this policy, or you'll be fired. Believe what I say, or you'll be punished. The argument itself doesn't need to be strong if the person on the receiving end is too afraid to challenge it. The fallacy works because it removes the option of rational discourse, leaving only submission or risk. Fear is a powerful motivator. When faced with the risk of harm, whether physical, financial, social, or emotional, most will choose self-preservation over confrontation. This is why this fallacy appears so often in politics, workplaces, and personal relationships. A government may silence critics by threatening imprisonment. A corporation might pressure employees to adopt a certain stance by implying job security depends on it. A parent might tell a child, "You better believe what I say, or else." Fear replaces discussion and disagreement becomes too costly. It stops people from evaluating the validity of an argument because they are more focused on avoiding punishment than seeking truth. This fallacy does more than just silence individuals. It fosters an environment where compliance is mistaken for consensus. When people pretend to agree out of fear, flawed ideas persist unchallenged. Over time, intimidation becomes the norm, eroding critical thinking and creating a culture where power dictates truth. Leaders who use force instead of persuasion shape a society where questioning authority is seen as dangerous. In such environments, misinformation spreads easily because those who recognize the flaws in an argument hesitate to speak out. The absence of dissent does not indicate correctness, only that people are too afraid to express disagreement. The appeal to force fallacy often appears in tandem with ad hominem attacks or false dilemma arguments. For example, a leader might say, "Anyone who opposes this policy is a traitor," immediately branding critics as enemies while pressuring them into silence. Similarly, a business executive might claim, "You're either with the company or against it," making it seem as though employees must choose between absolute loyalty or losing their careers. These rhetorical tactics strip individuals of their right to debate, replacing persuasion with fear-driven compliance. Resisting this fallacy requires courage and critical thinking. Separate the argument from the intimidation behind it. Ask, is this claim supported by logic, or is fear being used as a substitute for reasoning? If an idea can only survive through coercion, it likely cannot withstand scrutiny. Persuasion comes from evidence, discussion, and rational thought, not pressure or threats. By recognizing these tactics, individuals can reclaim their ability to think freely and make decisions based on logic rather than fear. Argument from silence. A historian examines an ancient text and notes that it never mentions a particular battle. Since the text doesn't mention the event, it must have never happened, they conclude. But does absence of evidence mean evidence of absence? Just because something isn't recorded doesn't mean it didn't exist. Historical records are often incomplete, selective, or lost to time, making silence an unreliable basis for drawing conclusions. That's argument from silence, the fallacy of assuming that if there is no evidence or mention of something, then it must not be true. If he didn't deny the accusation, it must be true. No one has complained about the new policy, so everyone must like it. There's no record of this tradition before the 1800s, so it must not have existed before then. In each case, silence is mistaken for proof of non-existence, even though the absence of evidence could have many explanations. A lack of written documentation does not mean an event, belief, or practice never occurred. It only means we lack direct proof of it. This fallacy works because people expect complete records and immediate responses. If something is true, they assume it should have been documented or acknowledged. However, historical events may go unrecorded for countless reasons: lack of surviving sources, deliberate suppression, or simple irrelevance to the record keepers of the time. Some ancient civilizations relied primarily on oral traditions rather than written records, meaning many significant events may never have been recorded. Similarly, a person's silence doesn't always indicate guilt or agreement. They may be unaware of the accusation, choose to ignore it, or feel it doesn't warrant a response. Assuming that silence is an admission of truth oversimplifies complex human behavior and ignores alternative explanations. The argument from silence fallacy is common in historical research, legal cases, and everyday assumptions. A prosecutor might argue, the defendant never denied the charge, so they must be guilty. A researcher might claim, there are no writings about this civilization practicing medicine, so they must not have had doctors. A journalist might assume, the company didn't respond to the allegations, so they must be true. In all these cases, the lack of a response or record is treated as definitive proof, even when alternative explanations exist. Silence could be a strategic decision, an indication of irrelevance, or simply a case of missing evidence that has not yet been found. This fallacy also appears in scientific debates, where skeptics dismiss theories or discoveries simply because they haven't been observed yet. We've never detected extraterrestrial life, so it must not exist. No one has ever seen a black hole directly, so they might not be real. Scientific progress is full of discoveries that were once absent from the record, until evidence eventually emerged. Assuming that something does not exist simply because it hasn't been observed is an error in reasoning that overlooks the possibility of future discoveries. To avoid falling for this fallacy, ask, does the lack of evidence mean something never happened, or could there be another reason for the silence? Consider whether records were lost, events were unimportant to record keepers, or whether the issue simply hasn't been investigated deeply enough. Just because something isn't mentioned doesn't mean it didn't exist. True conclusions should be based on evidence, not the absence of it. A lack of proof does not automatically equate to proof of absence, and recognizing this distinction is crucial for sound reasoning and informed decision-making. Cherry picking. A company claims its product is the best on the market, citing a study that found it outperformed competitors. What they don't mention is that the study was funded by their own research team, while several independent studies found no advantage. The company didn't lie, it just left out the inconvenient details. By selecting only the most favorable evidence, they create a misleading impression, making it seem as though their claim is universally supported, when, in reality, the full picture tells a different story. That's cherry-picking, the fallacy of selectively choosing evidence that supports a claim while ignoring data that contradicts it. This athlete has won 5 games in a row, without mentioning that they lost 10 before that. Crime is at an all-time low, but only in one city, while national crime rates are rising. This diet is proven to work, based on only the most successful case studies. Instead of considering the full picture, cherry-picking presents a skewed version of reality that favors one side of an argument. The fallacy relies on the assumption that people will not look beyond the information provided, allowing an incomplete dataset to pass as conclusive proof. This fallacy works because people are naturally drawn to confirming evidence. If a claim seems convincing, we tend to focus on information that supports it and overlook contradictory details. Politicians use it to push narratives, advertisers use it to sell products, and media outlets use it to create compelling headlines. A lawyer might highlight favorable witness testimony while ignoring conflicting accounts. A climate change skeptic might point to one cold winter as proof that global warming isn't real, ignoring decades of rising temperatures. A pharmaceutical company may promote a new drug by highlighting a single successful study while disregarding multiple trials that showed minimal benefits or concerning side effects. By emphasizing only the evidence that fits their argument, cherry-pickers create a misleading sense of certainty. This fallacy is particularly effective because it relies on a partial truth. Unlike outright falsehoods, which can be easily disproven, cherry-picking manipulates reality by presenting only a fraction of the available data. The claims may not be technically false, but they distort the truth by omitting important counterpoints. This makes it harder to detect the fallacy, as the audience may not realize there is additional contradictory information that was intentionally left out. Cherry-picking is also dangerous because it fuels misinformation and reinforces biases. If someone already believes a particular viewpoint, they are more likely to accept selective evidence that confirms it rather than searching for a balanced perspective. This fallacy plays a key role in conspiracy theories, where isolated facts are strung together to create a misleading narrative while all contradicting evidence is ignored. It also influences scientific and medical misinformation, where people cherry-pick isolated studies or anecdotal evidence to support controversial or debunked claims. To counter cherry-picking, ask what evidence is being left out. Seek out sources that provide a comprehensive view, rather than relying on selective information designed to push an agenda. A claim should be judged by the whole body of evidence, not just the parts that support a specific view. Truth comes from considering all relevant information, not just the convenient pieces. Critical thinking requires recognizing the gaps in an argument and questioning whether the evidence presented represents the full picture or just a curated selection meant to mislead. Definitional Retreat. A debate unfolds about intelligence, and one person claims anyone with a high IQ is intelligent. But when presented with examples of people with high IQs making poor decisions, they shift the goalposts. Well, true intelligence isn't just IQ, it's also wisdom and good judgment. The definition quietly changes to avoid contradiction, making the argument impossible to challenge. What was originally a rigid definition of intelligence suddenly becomes flexible, ensuring the speaker never has to admit they were wrong. That's definitional retreat, the fallacy of subtly redefining a term when faced with counter-arguments to protect an original claim from being disproven. A real athlete must be in peak physical condition, until someone points out a successful athlete with a physical disability. Art is only what is displayed in a museum until examples of famous street art are brought up. True democracy requires full citizen participation until low voter turnout is mentioned. Each time, the definition is adjusted to avoid admitting the claim was too rigid or incorrect. Instead of refining their position based on counterarguments, the person simply shifts their terms to maintain the illusion of consistency. This fallacy works because definitions shape arguments. If a claim hinges on a specific definition, changing that definition mid-debate allows a person to dodge refutation without directly conceding their mistake. It allows them to shift the meaning of words to fit their preferred conclusion rather than acknowledging that the original definition was too narrow or flawed. This tactic also makes it frustratingly difficult to engage in a meaningful discussion, as the definition keeps evolving just enough to keep the original claim intact, no matter how much evidence is presented against it. The definitional retreat fallacy is common in discussions about identity, philosophy, and abstract concepts. A person might argue, success means financial wealth, but when confronted with happy, fulfilled people who aren't set rich, they adjust, well, true success is about personal achievement too. A coach may claim only the best players make the team, only to redefine best as including attitude and commitment when a more talented player is excluded. A politician might state, we have full employment, but when pressed on underemployment and job quality, they redefine employment to include part-time, temporary, or low-wage work. These shifting definitions make it impossible to engage in a fair discussion because the goalposts are always moving, making the argument unfalsifiable. This fallacy is particularly problematic in scientific and legal debates. If someone argues, this medication is safe, and later redefines safe to mean it only has mild side effects, they've retreated from their original claim without admitting it. In legal discussions, someone may say, this law protects free speech, but when questioned about cases where it restricts speech, they redefine free speech to mean only government-protected speech rather than unrestricted expression. By constantly adjusting definitions, people create an illusion of correctness when in reality they are avoiding genuine debate. To counter this fallacy, ask, has the definition changed during the argument? If a term keeps evolving to dodge valid counterpoints, it's a sign that the original claim was flawed. Another strategy is to establish clear definitions at the beginning of a discussion to prevent retreating later. Arguments should be built on stable, clear definitions, not on words that change whenever they are challenged. If a definition must be altered to keep a claim alive, the claim itself likely wasn't strong to begin with. False precision. A politician steps onto the stage and declares, our new policy will create exactly 3,452,876 jobs over the next 5 years. The number sounds impressive, but can job growth really be predicted with such pinpoint accuracy? By using an overly precise figure, the speaker makes their claim seem more credible than it actually is. The specificity creates the illusion of certainty, even when the reality is filled with variables, unpredictable economic factors, and assumptions that could easily shift over time. That's false precision. The fallacy of using an exact or highly specific number to create an illusion of accuracy, even when the underlying data is uncertain or flawed. This investment strategy has a 98.43% success rate, without explaining how that figure was calculated. The average lifespan of this product is 12.76 years, as if such precision is meaningful or measurable. Crime rates have increased by exactly 4.327% this year. Ignoring the potential margin of error, inconsistent reporting methods, or differences in data collection across jurisdictions. In all these cases, the specific numbers create an illusion of certainty where there is none, misleading people into thinking that the claim is more reliable than it really is. This fallacy works because people associate precise numbers with reliability. A claim that sounds mathematically rigorous feels more authoritative than a vague statement, even if the numbers themselves are arbitrary or misleading. Advertisers use false precision to make products seem superior, often highlighting highly specific percentages of effectiveness that may not hold up under scrutiny. Financial analysts rely on it to make predictions appear more credible, even when stock markets and economic trends are inherently unpredictable. Even in scientific discussions, precision can be misused to overstate confidence in uncertain data. By adding extra decimal places, an argument can sound more objective than it actually is, playing into the assumption that exactness equals truth. The false precision fallacy is especially misleading in economics, medicine, and public policy. A study might claim, this drug is 92.38% effective, but if the sample size is too small, the methodology is flawed, or the margin of error is large, the number is meaningless. A company might boast, our sales increased by 17.294% last quarter, when rounding to 17% would be more honest and reflect the true variability in financial data. A government official might state, tax cuts will increase GDP by exactly $126.48 billion, despite economic forecasting being highly uncertain and dependent on many unpredictable factors. The false sense of exactitude distracts from the broader reality. Some things simply cannot be measured with such precision, and the attempt to do so often misleads rather than informs. This fallacy is also frequently used in polling and statistics. A survey might claim that 63.27% of voters support a policy, but if the margin of error is plus or minus 4%, the actual level of support could be significantly different. Weather forecasts might predict that there is a 67.39% chance of rain tomorrow, but meteorology is based on probability models, and adding unnecessary decimal places does not make the forecast any more reliable. In medical research, a diet study might claim participants lost an average of 8.935 pounds in 6 months, even though real-world weight loss fluctuates and varies widely between individuals. These highly specific numbers create a false impression of precision when, in reality, a rounded or more generalized figure would be just as informative, if not more honest. To counter this fallacy, ask, does this level of precision make sense? If a claim presents a highly specific number without explaining how it was calculated, it may be designed to mislead. Look for the source of the number, examine whether rounding would significantly change the meaning, and consider whether the level of detail provided is even realistic. Genuine accuracy is rooted in sound methodology, not in unnecessary decimal places. Precision without context is just a trick to make weak arguments look stronger. The more precise a claim appears, the more carefully it should be examined to ensure that the numbers serve truth rather than illusion. Presentism Fallacy. A modern critic looks at a 19th-century novel and says, this author was clearly sexist and outdated. No one should read their work anymore. But is it fair to judge people from the past by today's moral and cultural standards? Can historical figures and societies be expected to think and act as we do now? That's presentism fallacy, the mistake of applying contemporary values, beliefs, or knowledge to judge the past, ignoring historical context. Medieval doctors were ignorant because they didn't understand germ theory. The Founding Fathers were hypocrites because they didn't support universal suffrage. Ancient civilizations were primitive because they lacked modern technology. These statements assume that people from earlier times should have had access to knowledge, values, and perspectives that didn't exist yet, dismissing the realities of their historical setting. This fallacy overlooks the gradual nature of social and scientific progress, assuming that historical figures were willfully ignorant rather than acknowledging the intellectual limits of their era. This fallacy works because modern people often assume that our current values are the ultimate standard, forgetting that societies evolve. While some past beliefs may seem obviously flawed today, they were often shaped by the cultural and intellectual limits of their time. Holding historical figures to modern ethical standards can erase the complexities of history, preventing us from understanding how and why societies changed. It also leads to the dismissal of important historical figures who played a role in shaping the very progress that allows us to critique them today. The Presentism Fallacy is especially common in discussions about history, literature, politics, and ethics. A historian might dismiss an ancient legal system as barbaric without considering its purpose in that era. A student might reject reading classic books because they contain outdated ideas, missing the opportunity to learn about the time period they reflect. A political movement might condemn historical figures entirely, rather than recognizing both their flaws and their contributions. This oversimplification distorts history, making it harder to appreciate progress and understand how societies evolve. It also creates a dangerous precedent where historical figures are judged without nuance, leading to cultural erasure rather than meaningful analysis. Interestingly, Presentism fallacy is the opposite of the historical fallacy, which assumes that past conditions can be recreated in the present. While presentism unfairly applies modern values to the past, historical fallacy wrongly assumes that past solutions or systems can be transplanted into the modern world unchanged. Both distort history, one by oversimplifying the past as morally inferior, the other by romanticizing it as a perfect model for the present. To avoid this fallacy, ask, am I judging the past fairly, or am I imposing today's values onto it? Understanding history means acknowledging its complexities, recognizing both progress and imperfection, and learning how different time periods shaped human thought. The past should be studied in its own context, not rewritten to fit modern sensibilities. Appreciating history for what it was, rather than what we wish it had been, allows us to learn from it without distorting reality. Historical fallacy. A politician argues, in the 1950s, families were stronger and crime rates were lower. We need to go back to those values to fix society today. But is history really that simple? Are past conditions directly responsible for past outcomes, and can they be replicated in a completely different era? This kind of reasoning assumes that historical circumstances can be copied and pasted into the present, ignoring the social, economic, and cultural changes that have taken place since then. That's historical fallacy, the flawed reasoning that assumes past events, trends, or conditions directly apply to the present or future, without accounting for context, complexity, or change. Ancient civilizations lived in harmony with nature, so their way of life must be superior. Medieval societies were deeply religious, and people were happier then. The Great Depression proves that the stock market will crash in exactly the same way again. These claims oversimplify history, assuming that past patterns must repeat themselves exactly, or that past successes can be recreated without considering the broader circumstances that shape them. They also ignore the fact that historical records themselves are often incomplete, biased, or interpreted through modern perspectives that distort what really happened. This fallacy works because history provides compelling narratives. People look to the past for lessons, but misusing history can lead to misguided policies, nostalgia-driven decisions, and unrealistic expectations. Historical comparisons often ignore social, technological, and cultural shifts. A business leader might argue, we should adopt the same strategies that made this company successful in the 1980s, overlooking how markets, technology, and consumer behavior have changed. A nation might implement policies inspired by a past economic boom, failing to recognize the unique factors that contributed to that success. Similarly, a school board might push for traditional education methods without considering how modern research has refined our understanding of learning. The historical fallacy is especially misleading in politics, economics, and social debates. A leader might claim cutting taxes led to economic growth in the past, so it will work exactly the same way now, without considering different economic conditions, inflation, or global trade shifts. A historian might argue empires always collapse after 300 years, ignoring the unique circumstances of each case and treating history as an inevitable cycle rather than a complex interaction of forces. A health expert might say, our ancestors ate this diet, so it must be the healthiest option, disregarding differences in lifestyle, environment, and medical knowledge. This fallacy can also be seen in personal arguments. Someone might say, my grandfather never went to college and he became successful, so higher education isn't important anymore, ignoring how job markets and economic opportunities have changed over time. This fallacy is often linked to presentism, where people judge historical figures and societies using modern moral standards, assuming that past cultures should have behaved in the same way we do today. Conversely, it can also manifest as Golden Age thinking, where people believe that a past era was objectively better and that returning to those values will solve modern problems. Both distort the complexities of history, reducing it to an oversimplified lesson instead of an evolving story shaped by countless variables. To avoid this fallacy, ask, are the past and present really comparable, or are key details being ignored? History provides insights, but it doesn't repeat itself in exact patterns. Proper analysis requires understanding not just what happened, but why it happened, and whether those conditions still exist today. Rather than using history as a rigid blueprint, it should be treated as a guide to understanding human behavior, systemic change, and the unpredictable nature of progress. Moralistic fallacy. A speaker argues, violence is wrong, so human nature must be inherently peaceful. But does morality determine reality? Just because something should be a certain way doesn't mean it is that way. Human nature and social structures do not always align with our moral expectations, and assuming they do can lead to distorted conclusions. That's moralistic fallacy, the mistaken belief that if something is morally desirable, then it must also be a natural or factual truth. Racism is wrong, so humans must be born completely free of bias. All people are equal, so there are no biological differences between men and women. A healthy diet shouldn't cause weight gain, so calories must not matter. These arguments confuse how things ought to be with how they actually are, assuming that reality must conform to human values. Morality does not dictate biology, psychology, or sociology. Rather, it is a human construct that often exists in tension with natural tendencies and societal realities. This fallacy works because people want morality and nature to align. We prefer to believe that fairness, kindness, and justice are woven into the fabric of existence, but reality is often more complex. Natural selection, for instance, favors survival and reproduction over fairness. Emotions like jealousy and aggression have evolutionary roots that persist despite our ethical condemnation of them. Similarly, while we may believe that economic inequality should not exist, market forces, resource distribution, and human behavior make complete economic equality nearly impossible. The failure to distinguish moral ideals from empirical truths can lead to denial of facts and misguided attempts to reshape reality based on wishful thinking rather than evidence. The moralistic fallacy is common in debates on science, politics, and ethics. A politician might argue, war is unethical, so it must be avoidable in all cases, ignoring historical conflicts driven by survival and power struggles. A health expert might claim, children should all have the same learning abilities, so intelligence differences must be caused only by environment, dismissing genetic influences on cognition. A sociologist might state, crime should not exist in a just society, so social programs alone must be enough to eliminate it, overlooking other contributing factors like psychological predispositions, socioeconomic conditions, and law enforcement effectiveness. These arguments fail because they assume moral beliefs override physical and social realities, when in truth both must be considered in problem solving. This fallacy also appears in discussions about gender, psychology, and medicine. Someone might claim, men and women should be exactly the same, so any differences must be due to cultural conditioning alone, ignoring biological influences on behavior and physical capabilities. A mental health advocate might say, people should be able to control their emotions, so mental illness must be purely a matter of willpower, disregarding the role of neurobiology and genetics. In medicine, a patient might believe natural treatments are better because nature wouldn't create harmful substances, ignoring the fact that many natural compounds are toxic while many synthetic drugs save lives. These examples illustrate how moral reasoning can cloud scientific and practical understanding. To counter this fallacy, ask, am I assuming something is true just because I believe it should be true? Morality guides how we want the world to be, but facts describe how the world is. Effective change comes from recognizing reality first, then working to improve it. Instead of reshaping facts to fit moral ideals, progress is best achieved by accepting evidence as it stands and developing ethical solutions that work within the real constraints of human nature, biology, and social structures. Nivana Fallacy. A critic dismisses a renewable energy plan by saying, wind and solar aren't perfect, sometimes the sun doesn't shine, and the wind doesn't blow. We should stick with fossil fuels instead. But is the presence of flaws enough to reject an idea entirely? Does a solution have to be perfect to be worthwhile? Demanding flawlessness from any policy, product, or decision ignores the reality that progress is made through incremental improvements, not sudden perfection. That's Nivana Fallacy, the mistaken belief that if a solution isn't flawless, it must be completely useless. Vaccines aren't 100% effective, so they don't work at all. Public transportation has delays, so it's a failure. Recycling doesn't eliminate all waste, so there's no point in doing it. This kind of reasoning assumes that unless a system solves every problem perfectly, it should be abandoned altogether. It disregards the real-world benefits of partial improvements and ignores the fact that almost all practical solutions come with trade-offs. This fallacy works because people are naturally drawn to absolutes. If something isn't a perfect fix, they assume it must be fundamentally broken. However, real-world systems are complex, and nearly every decision involves balancing benefits and drawbacks. Medicine has side effects, governments make mistakes, and technologies have limitations, but that doesn't mean they aren't valuable. Dismissing something just because it isn't ideal prevents progress and encourages cynicism. The world operates in shades of gray, not in black and white perfection, and the pursuit of absolute solutions often leads to paralysis rather than action. The Nivana fallacy is common in debates about policy, technology, and social issues. A politician might argue, this healthcare reform isn't solving every problem, so it's a failure, disregarding the significant improvements it provides. A skeptic might say, electric cars still rely on fossil fuels for production, so they aren't helping the environment at all, ignoring the fact that they reduce emissions overall. A business leader might claim, work-from-home setups aren't as efficient as offices, so remote work should be eliminated, overlooking the benefits of flexibility and productivity gains for many employees. Instead of evaluating whether a solution makes things better, this fallacy unfairly demands an impossible standard of perfection, leading to stagnation instead of progress. This fallacy also appears in personal decision-making. Someone might avoid exercising because it won't make me lose weight overnight, or refuse to start a project because it won't be perfect on the first try. Perfectionism, in this sense, is a close relative of the Nivana fallacy, causing people to dismiss progress simply because the end result won't be flawless. The reality is that improvement is almost always gradual, and small steps in the right direction are far better than doing nothing at all. To counter this fallacy, ask, does this solution make things better even if it's not perfect? Rejecting progress in pursuit of perfection can lead to missed opportunities and stagnation. A flawed but functional approach often outweighs the risks of doing nothing at all. Progress happens through incremental improvements, not instant perfection. Recognizing that all solutions have limitations allows us to focus on what works and build upon it rather than rejecting useful ideas simply because they are not flawless. Reification Fallacy. A student says, "Science has proven that the universe wants us to be happy. But does the universe want anything? Can an abstract concept like science have desires or intentions?" Treating an idea as if it has real physical agency is a common but misleading way to argue. While this kind of language can be poetic or persuasive, it often obscures who or what is actually responsible, leading to confusion rather than clarity. That's reification fallacy, the mistake of treating an abstract concept as if it were a concrete physical entity with its own thoughts, desires, or actions. Justice demands that we take action. Society has decided that this is unacceptable. History will remember our choices. In each case, an abstract idea is personified, giving it agency it does not actually possess. By attributing human-like intentions to intangible forces, this fallacy makes complex issues seem more absolute than they truly are. It also shifts focus away from the actual people, institutions, or systems responsible for shaping events, which can make it harder to analyze or challenge those forces effectively. This fallacy works because personification makes ideas feel more powerful and authoritative. If science says something, it sounds more compelling than admitting that individual scientists interpret data and form theories. If history teaches us, it implies an objective lesson rather than recognizing that historians analyze and debate past events. When vague entities like fate or the market are treated as active forces rather than collections of human decisions, it removes accountability and replaces critical thinking with illusion. By assuming that abstract forces operate independently of human influence, this fallacy gives the false impression that certain outcomes are inevitable or beyond question. The reification fallacy appears frequently in politics, philosophy, and media. A leader might say, "The economy is angry," suggesting that economic trends have emotions rather than being the result of policies and human behavior. A motivational speaker might claim, "The universe will reward you for positive thinking," implying that a vast and different cosmos has personal interest in individuals. A legal analyst might argue, "The law must find justice," when in reality, laws do not find anything, people interpret and enforce them. A business executive might say, "The market will correct itself," as if economic trends act on their own, rather than being shaped by the actions of investors, corporations, and regulators. This kind of reasoning creates an illusion of inevitability or authority where none exists, allowing those in power to avoid responsibility by blaming abstract concepts rather than human choices. This fallacy also plays a role in personal decision-making. A student might say, "Destiny will decide whether I get into college," instead of acknowledging that preparation and effort play a major role. A person struggling in their career might declare, "Success finds those who wait," rather than recognizing the need for action and planning. By attributing outcomes to vague, personified forces, people risk surrendering control over their own lives and choices, believing that external forces dictate their fate rather than their own actions. To counter this fallacy, ask who or what is actually making this decision. Clarifying who is responsible forces arguments to be more precise and prevents vague abstractions from misleading the discussion. When confronted with statements that assign human-like qualities to abstract concepts, challenge them by identifying the real agents of change. Reality is shaped by actions, not by imagined forces acting on their own. By resisting the temptation to simplify complex issues through personification, we can think more critically, hold the right people accountable, and better understand the true causes behind events. Self-sealing argument. A conspiracy theorist claims, the government is hiding proof of aliens. When asked for evidence, they respond, of course there's no proof because the government is covering it up. No matter what counter-argument is presented, the claim is designed to protect itself from being disproven. It is not just difficult to challenge, it is structured so that any attempt to disprove it only reinforces the belief itself. The argument is sealed against scrutiny, making it impervious to logic or evidence. That's self-sealing argument. A fallacy where a claim is structured in such a way that it cannot be proven wrong, regardless of the evidence. If you don't agree with me, it just proves you're too brainwashed to understand. All successful people follow this mindset. If you don't succeed, you just didn't follow it correctly. This theory is true for those who are enlightened enough to see it. These arguments are rigged to be unfalsifiable, making them impossible to test or debate. Instead of defending their claim with logical reasoning, the person shifts the argument to make it immune to criticism. This fallacy works because it shuts down critical thinking. Instead of allowing discussion, it dismisses all opposition as proof of its own correctness. It appears frequently in pseudoscience, conspiracy theories, cult-like belief systems, and ideological debates. A guru might say, if my methods don't work for you, it's because you didn't believe hard enough. A political activist might argue, anyone who disagrees with this policy is part of the problem. A business consultant might claim, this strategy works every time. If it didn't work for you, you must have done it wrong. These statements create a closed loop where disagreement only reinforces the argument rather than challenging it. No matter what counter-evidence is provided, the claim is designed to dismiss it before it can be seriously considered. The self-sealing argument fallacy is dangerous because it prevents meaningful discussion. It dismisses counter-arguments without consideration, making honest debate impossible. If a claim cannot be tested or questioned, it becomes a dogma rather than a reasoned position. This fallacy also fosters intellectual arrogance, as those using it often refuse to acknowledge alternative viewpoints. Over time, it can lead to the isolation of ideas within ideological echo chambers, where only those who already agree are considered credible. This fallacy is often linked to circular reasoning, where the conclusion is assumed within the premise, and ad hominem, where critics are dismissed based on personal attacks rather than their arguments. For example, a self-sealing claim might state, only intelligent people understand this argument. If you disagree, it just proves you aren't intelligent. This tactic discourages genuine discussion by framing disagreement as proof that the opponent is unqualified to argue. To counter this fallacy, ask, is there any possible way to prove this claim wrong? If an argument is designed to deflect all criticism rather than engage with it, it is not based on reason. It is a belief that refuses to be challenged. True knowledge comes from arguments that can be tested, questioned, and refined, not ones that seal themselves off from scrutiny. A strong argument should be open to potential disproof because truth can withstand examination. When encountering a self-sealing claim, challenge the person to specify what kind of evidence, if any, would make them reconsider. If they cannot answer, it's a sign that their belief is not grounded in logic, but in a self-reinforcing illusion. Wishful thinking fallacy. A student glances at their unopened textbook the night before an exam and tells themselves, I'll do fine, I just have a good feeling about it. But is confidence a substitute for preparation? Just because we want something to be true doesn't mean reality will cooperate. Positive thinking can be helpful in motivating action, but it does not replace actual effort, planning, or preparation. Hoping for the best without addressing real obstacles leads to failure more often than success. That's wishful thinking fallacy. The mistaken belief that something is true simply because it would be desirable for it to be true. I know my business idea will succeed because I really believe in it. If we think positively, everything will work out. Bad things won't happen to me because I'm a good person. In each case, the person assumes that their hopes or desires influence reality rather than considering actual evidence, logic, or risk factors. This way of thinking often replaces analysis with optimism, leading people to dismiss legitimate warnings or concerns in favor of blind faith. This fallacy works because optimism feels good. People prefer to believe in favorable outcomes rather than confront uncertainty, effort, or unpleasant possibilities. It is comforting to think that the universe rewards good intentions, but reality is often indifferent to personal beliefs. When people rely solely on wishful thinking, they fail to acknowledge potential risks and take necessary precautions. A student who assumes they will pass without studying is setting themselves up for failure. A business owner who refuses to consider market trends because they just know their idea will work risks losing everything. Ignoring reality in favor of positive thinking can lead to poor decisions, lack of preparation, and unrealistic expectations. Hope alone doesn't create success, planning and action do. The wishful thinking fallacy appears frequently in business, politics, and personal decisions. A leader might argue, if we pass this law, everything will improve, without considering possible complications or unintended consequences. An investor might assume, this stock will go up because I want it to, ignoring market trends, financial indicators, or economic downturns. A person in a toxic relationship might insist they'll change because I love them, even when evidence suggests otherwise. Athletes may convince themselves, I'll win because I believe in myself, disregarding the need for practice, skill development, or strategic preparation. This mindset replaces careful evaluation with emotional preference, leading to decisions based on fantasy rather than facts. This fallacy is particularly dangerous because it encourages inaction. If someone truly believes that good things will happen simply because they should, they may not take the necessary steps to ensure a good outcome. A government that assumes the economy will fix itself without intervention may ignore warning signs of a financial crisis. A person who assumes their health will improve simply because they believe in a positive outcome might neglect medical treatment. Believing in success is not the same as working toward it, and assuming that the universe will align to grant personal wishes can be a recipe for disaster. To counter this fallacy, ask, is there actual evidence that this will happen, or am I just hoping it will? A more effective approach is to combine optimism with realism, acknowledge the potential for success, but also prepare for difficulties along the way. Positive thinking is valuable, but it must be paired with logic, effort, and a willingness to adapt when reality doesn't align with expectations. Wishing for the best is fine, so long as it doesn't replace reasoned decision-making and tangible action. Reductionism Fallacy. A scientist explains human consciousness as just a series of chemical reactions in the brain. While technically true, does this explanation really capture the full depth of human thought, emotion, and experience? By oversimplifying a complex phenomenon, the statement reduces it to something far less meaningful. Human experiences involve intricate interactions between biology, personal history, environment, and culture, none of which can be fully explained by a single simplified cause. That's reductionism fallacy. The mistake of oversimplifying a complex issue to a single cause, explanation, or component while ignoring its broader context. Love is just a chemical reaction. The economy is just about supply and demand. Depression is just a lack of serotonin. These statements may have some truth, but they dismiss the complexity of the subject by treating it as nothing more than its most basic elements. While breaking things down into simpler components can aid understanding, it becomes a fallacy when it excludes crucial factors that influence the whole system. This fallacy works because simplification makes things easier to understand. People prefer straightforward answers to complicated questions, and breaking things down into simple explanations feels satisfying. However, many systems, whether biological, social, or philosophical, are too intricate to be reduced to a single factor. Oversimplification can lead to misguided policies, flawed scientific interpretations, and a misunderstanding of reality. By focusing only on one element of a system, people ignore the interconnected nature of complex issues, which can result in ineffective solutions or outright misinterpretations. The reductionism fallacy is common in science, psychology, politics, and everyday reasoning. A policymaker might argue, crime happens because of poverty, ignoring factors like education, social structures, and mental health. A business leader might say, success is just about hard work, failing to acknowledge privilege, opportunity, and market conditions. A medical expert might claim, obesity is just about calories in versus calories out, oversimplifying the role of genetics, hormones, and lifestyle factors. While these statements contain partial truths, they ignore the bigger picture, leading to shallow conclusions and ineffective solutions. In science, reductionism is often contrasted with holistic approaches. While breaking down a system into individual components can lead to valuable insights, it becomes a fallacy when it assumes that understanding the parts automatically means understanding the whole. For example, knowing the properties of individual neurons does not fully explain consciousness. Similarly, in medicine, treating only the symptoms of a disease without considering environmental or psychological factors can lead to incomplete treatment strategies. Reductionist thinking can limit progress when it ignores the ways in which multiple factors interact. This fallacy is also commonly seen in political debates. A candidate might claim the reason for unemployment is laziness, ignoring automation, education systems, economic downturns, and shifting job markets. Another might argue gun violence is caused by violent video games, disregarding social conditions, gun laws, and mental health issues. These overly simple explanations appeal to people's desire for clarity, but fail to address the real complexities of the problems they claim to solve. To counter this fallacy, ask, what is being left out of this explanation? Understanding complexity requires considering multiple influences rather than reducing everything to a single cause. Instead of looking for a single answer, ask how different factors interact to create a broader outcome. While simplification is useful for learning, it should never come at the cost of accuracy or depth. Embracing complexity allows for more effective problem-solving, deeper insights, and a more accurate understanding of the world. The Romantic Rebel Fallacy. A critic dismisses a popular book saying, if the masses love it, it must be shallow and unoriginal. But does popularity automatically make something bad? Just as some assume a belief is correct because many people hold it, others reject ideas because they are widely accepted, falling into the trap of contrarian thinking. The assumption is that truth, authenticity, or quality exists only in opposition to mainstream acceptance, leading to the automatic rejection of anything popular, regardless of its actual merits. That's the Romantic Rebel Fallacy, the mistaken belief that something is false, inferior, or unworthy simply because it is mainstream, conventional, or widely accepted. If everyone supports this movement, it must be corrupt. If a film is critically acclaimed, it's probably overrated. Real artists aren't recognized in their time, so anything popular isn't real art. These arguments assume that the truth or value of an idea is determined by how much or how little society embraces it. However, dismissing something purely because it has broad appeal is just as intellectually lazy as accepting something uncritically because everyone else does. This fallacy works because people romanticize individuality and rebellion. The idea of standing against the crowd carries emotional appeal, making someone feel enlightened, unique, or superior for rejecting what others accept. There is a cultural fascination with the lone genius, the misunderstood artist, or the outsider who sees the truth, while the masses remain ignorant. However, rejecting something just because it is popular is no more rational than accepting something just because it is popular. Popularity does not inherently make something good or bad, it simply reflects that it has gained traction, and its merits must be evaluated independently of its level of mainstream appeal. The Romantic Rebel Fallacy is essentially the opposite of the Bandwagon Fallacy, which assumes that something is true or good simply because it is widely accepted. While bandwagon thinking leads people to follow the crowd uncritically, romantic rebellion leads them to reject the crowd uncritically. Both fail to engage with ideas on their actual merits, replacing independent thought with automatic opposition or conformity. One blindly follows the majority, while the other blindly opposes it, but neither approach involves real critical thinking. This fallacy appears frequently in art, politics, and intellectual discussions. A student might insist, "I only read obscure literature. Bestsellers are for the uninformed." A critic might claim, if a politician is widely supported, they must be corrupt. A music fan might say, once a band becomes famous, they sell out and lose their originality. In reality, some bestsellers are deeply insightful, some widely supported politicians are genuinely good leaders, and some famous musicians retain their artistry despite commercial success. While popularity can sometimes signal mediocrity or compromise, it does not automatically indicate lack of quality, depth, or value. This fallacy can also lead to impractical decision-making. A person might reject proven medical treatments in favor of alternative remedies purely because mainstream medicine endorses the former. An entrepreneur might ignore well-established business strategies because they are too conventional, only to struggle with unnecessary setbacks. A film buff might refuse to watch blockbuster films on principle, missing out on genuinely great works of cinema. In each case, the rejection of the mainstream is based on a knee-jerk aversion to popularity rather than a well-reasoned critique of the content itself. To counter this fallacy, ask, am I rejecting this idea because of its flaws, or just because it is widely accepted? True independent thinking means evaluating arguments and works on their actual merits, not assuming that going against the grain always makes you right. Being a critical thinker means neither following nor rejecting trends blindly, but instead forming opinions based on thoughtful consideration of evidence, reasoning, and experience. Rebellion for its own sake is just as misguided as blind conformity. The Simpleton's Fallacy. A scientist presents a complex explanation of climate change, filled with data and models. A skeptic responds, "If it's so complicated, then you don't really understand it. But does something need to be simple to be true?" Some ideas are inherently complex, requiring depth, nuance, and careful study. Dismissing them simply because they are difficult to explain leads to misunderstanding and the rejection of valuable insights. The term Simpleton's Fallacy is borrowed from Walter M. Miller Jr.'s 1960 novel, A Canticle for Leibowitz, in which knowledge is so despised that people greet each other with "good simpleton." This fallacy assumes that complexity means deception or incompetence, discouraging the pursuit of deeper understanding. Isaac Asimov described a version of it, the false notion that democracy means that my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge. This mindset promotes the idea that all perspectives are equally valid, even when one is based on rigorous analysis and the other on superficial reasoning. That's the Simpleton's Fallacy, the belief that if an explanation is complex, it must be wrong, overcomplicated, or intentionally misleading. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it. If this law is complicated, it must be corrupt. A real solution shouldn't require so many steps. While simplicity is useful, not all truths can be condensed without distorting meaning. Some subjects, like climate science, medicine, and law, require detailed explanations that cannot be fully grasped in a brief statement. People are drawn to simplicity. Easy answers feel satisfying, while complexity requires effort. However, science, economics, medicine, and law involve intricate systems that cannot always be reduced to a single cause. When people demand simple explanations, they often end up with misleading or incomplete conclusions. U.S. President Barack Obama warned in 2016, "In politics and in life, ignorance is not a virtue." Rejecting complexity under the guise of being real or honest is a way to dismiss expertise in favor of emotionally appealing but factually incorrect narratives. This fallacy appears frequently in politics, science, and social debates. A politician might say, "Fixing the economy is simple, just lower taxes," ignoring broader impacts on public services, income inequality, and national debt. A conspiracy theorist might claim, If climate change were real, they'd explain it in a single sentence, dismissing decades of research and vast amounts of empirical data. A person struggling with weight loss might insist losing weight is just about eating less and moving more, ignoring factors like genetics, metabolic disorders, and psychological influences. In each of these cases, an overly simplistic explanation prevents a more nuanced and accurate understanding of the issue. This fallacy is particularly dangerous because it discourages deeper inquiry. If people believe complex answers are convoluted, they may reject expert knowledge in favor of simplistic but false explanations. This tendency played a role in the 2016 U.S. presidential election, where rejection of expertise and oversimplified messaging influenced public discourse. When voters are encouraged to believe that complex policy issues have obvious solutions, they may overlook the necessity of in-depth analysis and well-informed decision-making. A notable portrayal of this fallacy is in the 1994 movie Forrest Gump, where the main character's simple worldview is celebrated, reinforcing the idea that deep thinking is unnecessary. While the film presents Forrest as a lovable and kind figure, it subtly promotes the notion that intelligence and complexity are overrated, and that wisdom comes from a lack of intellectual curiosity. Though appealing, this romanticization of simplicity can discourage people from embracing the necessary depth required to tackle real-world problems. The Simpleton's fallacy is closely related to the false dilemma and reductionism fallacy, both of which assume oversimplified answers to complex problems. The term has also been used to describe a deceptive tactic where someone feigns ignorance to force an opponent to over-explain something they'd rather avoid discussing. For example, during a political debate, a candidate might say, "I may not be a fancy economist, but I just don't see how raising taxes helps working people. Can you explain that in plain terms?" This tactic forces the opponent into a defensive position, simplifying a complex issue while implying that any explanation is an attempt to obscure the truth. To counter this fallacy, ask, is this really as simple as it seems, or is important information being ignored? While clarity is valuable, truth is not always simple. Recognizing complexity is a sign of deeper understanding, not ignorance. The most important discoveries in science, philosophy, and ethics have been built on a willingness to engage with difficult questions, rather than dismissing them as unnecessarily complicated. And that's a wrap on logical fallacies. Now that you know how they work, you'll start spotting them everywhere. News debates, advertisements, even casual conversations. But here's the real challenge. Did you notice any real-life fallacies while watching this video? Let me know in the comments. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps more people see this content. And if you want to sharpen your critical thinking even more, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.